knitting, I have got my hot chocolate, I'm ready to learn about Japan.
I have a little cup of tea in a mug with pumpkins because, despite the fact it's been an accident, I have consistently had some kind of set dressing in my tent that is related to the episode.
It's fate.
I swear I have not. Actually, I did deliberately wear all my Yu-Gi-Oh jewelry for the Yu-Gi-Oh episode,
Yeah, that was participatory.
but I did own the Yu-Gi-Oh jewelry for unrelated reasons.
Right, you owed I assume for Yu-Gi-Oh reasons.
Most of it for Yu-Gi-Oh reasons. Some of it just because I'm a little magpie, and if you want to buy something from a stall at Comic-Con and they have Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, I will
It might be
probably
the
buy it.
shiniest thing.
It's gonna be the shiniest thing there, and I only need so many Naruto Hitayates. I will say,
I'll be
if
doing
you have access to buy a Naruto Hitayate, they are exactly the right size to put on your cat. So I do recommend owning at least one if you have a cat.
it. I don't even know what they are. I'm just imagining your cat and the
They're
grumpy.
If you've seen, like, Art of Naruto, you know they have those, like, rectangular metal things with symbols
I
on
do
them?
not know.
You have seen them, they're on every single Naruto character, you just didn't care because you don't
I
care about
haven't.
Naruto.
I
Like, you
think
have
I have
probably
seen,
scrolled past it on Tumblr or seen a picture of it
not
in a
with any
shop.
conscious knowledge of it being Naruto.
It is a thing you have seen and not absorbed because it was not relevant to your life.
This is true of so many things that are not in my life.
But it is one of several items that I have kept for no reason other than to annoy my cat.
That is a true cat owner behavior and is really what a cat toy is.
Most of which are hats,
Hats are very good for
because
cats.
cats in little hats are adorable, but my
What are their
cat.
soft little heads for, if not hats?
Why, if you know wear hat, why have cute little face?
Right.
So,
Yesterday's
do you wanna
D&D
talk
did
about
mention
anime?
that. I think we should talk about anime. I think that is the purpose of our
What
presence
a
here.
plot twist it would be if I just kept talking about Naruto for the entire.
Like, I'm doing an archaeological reading of Naruto now.
Like, I've just changed my mind, actually. You need to find out about Naruto.
Should we introduce ourselves first?
Yes, we should do that.
Hello, listener. I am Duck. I go by he, them pronouns.
I'm Dia, I use they, them pronouns. And
And
this is
this is
Analysis
Analysis
Roulette.
Roulette. There we
One
are.
day we're gonna do that in sync.
One day we're going to do that in sync. This is the show where we analyze stuff. Yeah.
We analyze stuff and interrupt each other a lot because we both have a lot of strong opinions about anime and other things.
How have I become a person who has a strong opinion about anime? I
I'm
mean, I'm not
very
denying
sorry.
that I have, but how did this happen to me?
I know how it happened to me, which is I was forced to join anime society by my head of year in secondary school.
I tried to join Anime Society like my first couple weeks in university. And have you ever had the experience of kind of walking into like someone else's prayer meeting or even just like committee meeting and you get that, well, you're not allowed to be here, but nobody actually wants you here. You don't fit in, you never will, we're
Yeah.
not interested in helping. Anime Society was some kind of non-recruiting cult, such that it was not possible
People
to actually join.
I say this as someone who came from comic book fandom. Anime people are incredibly hostile to new anime people.
Right, that was the thing. If I'd come in and started listing off the 26 seasons that I had in full on my thumb drive, I'm sure I would have been accepted. But I was like, I would like to like anime, and they were like, "You scum,
Yeah.
leave our presence."
This is the thing is I was quite genuinely press ganged into finding out about anime because I did not want to join anime club at my school. It clashed with my choir practice. I didn't want to be there. I didn't know anyone.
And then
But there
somebody
was
dropped a
a
bit of Yu-Gi-Oh
pupil.
jewelry in your tea, and then you were forced.
No, there was a person in that club who had gone to the school saying that they were like not doing great socially. It was our first year at school, and my school had a friendship buddy system. So somebody just pulled me
You were
aside, like a teacher
assigned
pulled me aside and said, "Go to Anime Society. Someone needs a friend."
assigned anime at high school.
Literally, I was just like pulled out of class. Like, you have to join Anime Society. What are you doing Monday lunchtimes? And I'm like, choir practice. No, you're not. You're doing anime.
That sucks. Choir's better.
To be fair, we're still friends to this day.
But I'm glad it was a correct matchmaker judgment. But even
Yeah,
so,
the buddy system worked perfectly. But now I care about anime against my will.
and you can't stop. Literacy is a curse, and so it turns out is access to
I was already reading quite a lot of
Japanese
Yu-Gi-Oh!
animation.
Fanfiction at that age, but I had not watched any of Yu-Gi-Oh! I just read Yu-Gi-Oh! Fanfiction.
I assume on the basis of good tags rather than
Pretty pretty much. I
good
mean, this was
Yu-Gi-Oh!
in, like, late LiveJournal, early fanfic.net days,
Tagging
and
was not
you
a highly advanced
found
science.
fanfiction basically by stumbling upon archives,
Yeah, fanfiction was
and
not centralized, and tagging was not a highly refined technology.
yeah, and in my case in specific, I found a particularly good archive of Yu-Gi-Oh! Fanfic
You
and
were
just
just like,
read
I
it,
found a
like,
library. I'm reading
yeah,
the
I
library.
these are just books, and then once I joined Anime Society, for better or for worse, I found out that there was a show, and I went and watched it.
That's what they look like. That's what they
Yeah,
sound like.
that was not what I was picturing, but,
We're willing to adapt.
we made do with what we got.
Today we are talking about anime.
Yes, this month I have been watching a new anime, which is Food Wars Shokugeki no Soma.
hmm It's one of my favorite animes because I'm an insane person.
Would you like to introduce the listeners to Food Wars?
Certainly, Food Wars is so you know school sports anime. This is one of those, but the sport is cooking.
Which, to be fair, already gives it a step above school sports anime in my book.
It's cooking for me personally is much more fun to watch, even in animated form, than sports, which is partly why I love this show. It's a very, very high school anime, by which I mean it is very low stakes, framed as high stakes.
Mm.
We have a fairly large cast of characters, central to which is the eponymous Soma, who is the son of a diner chef. He is extremely proud of being a diner chef. He has been enrolled in the fanciest food school in more or less the world. Not entirely against his will, but certainly by surprise. And we observe his adventures as he totally fails to fit in, but makes friends anyway by being himself and cooking his own way, and engages in a vast number of Shokugeki food wars, cooking battles. This school runs on the basis of cooking battles. You can gamble anything you like on a cooking battle with the agreement of your opponent, which means, in particular, that the all powerful 10 seats of the student council who effectively run the school are routinely won by means of cooking contests. Whether people get expelled or not is also routinely on the basis of cooking contests. A lot of people get expelled because they lose one of these cooking contests. Land and buildings change hands. The right to run student groups is won or lost through cooking contests. Every single one of these is portrayed as the highest stakes thing that has ever happened. The stakes do increase over the course of the series as we go from this is just make it through your first term to we're having an all school contest tournament for fame and glory to we are having our first year exams, which for some reason involves us trekking all across Japan on a train and having different tests at different locations, to we're having a big group tournament to decide whether all of us get expelled or all of our opponents have to, admit that we win and let us stay and reform the school on our terms because they're trying to take over the school on their terms, which would be much less fun. There's a whole semi-fascist organization whose whole thing is cooking. Actually, cooking is suffering and should not be treated like fun. And everyone will be happy if they just stop trying to have fun. It's an interesting philosophy. Our heroes do not subscribe to it, and of course they win. And then the fifth season, the stakes actually increase, sort of, in that it's just a big international food contest, but it's a big food contest to which the mafia has been invited, and also, if our hero doesn't win, the princess has to marry the bad guy.
Yeah, which she seems remarkably fine with.
I think I think it's a combination of she has a little bit got the hots for teacher because teacher is young and handsome and seductive in a way that no one else in her life, because everyone else in her life is either her grandfather or a teenage boy. No one else in her life is suave and seductive.
Mm.
A combination of that and simply a genuine philosophical commitment to the most important thing in the world is cooking skills. So if he is the best cook that I know, I should marry him.
Yeah, it's just a very weird character beat to add to, and we must save her from forced marriage to have her not really care.
Right. She's just like, I have bigger things to worry about because she's mostly worried about saving her mother from the spiritual ennui of of being too good at judging food.
Mm. Honestly, I relate.
Oh, I should mention the weird superpowers.
Yes.
Various people in this world have weird cooking superpowers. This starts off near the beginning of the series as just a sort of regular people have their own specialties and they're really good at their thing that they're good at. We have the person whose thing is fermentation and the person who smokes stuff and the person who's really good at curry. You know, these
Mhm.
things make sense. And then these evolve into kind of this person can psychically trace you to imitate you perfectly so that they make the same dish as you before you even figured out what you're going to make. And then they can improve one step on it and then they win. The various mafia chefs all have deeply silly specialist cooking implements that are treated like these superpowers. And throughout this series, there is if, in the fifth season, it's a plot point. Up until then, it's just the reason that the princess is the princess, which is a combination of she comes from a profoundly famous and successful cooking dynasty, which, to be fair, is a thing that can
Yeah.
exist. You know, restaurants passing down through families is particularly a thing. I'm not sure
Yeah.
food critic is a thing that passes down through families quite so traditionally, but I'm willing to concede the possibility. But the reason it does this is that their family is occasionally blessed with the god tongue, which is simply an objectively correct judgment of all items of food. She will taste your dish and she will tell you that it needs more butter, and she will objectively, by the laws of the universe, be right because she has the god tongue.
Yeah.
This is just the whole series. Eventually, it also comes out that people from this family, separately from whether they have the god tongue, if they eat food that's really good, their clothes fall off.
Yes.
And then this evolves to if they eat food that's really good and they are particularly gifted in the make your clothes fall off gift, then when they eat the really good food, your clothes fall off.
Or eventually explode off,
Everyone's clothes in waves of nakedness through the stadium because the food was just that
leaving
good.
tatters of clothes on the floor.
The clothes just explode off your body because someone else ate fried rice that was just that good.
Why would you attend this event if that's a possibility?
I mean, I think normally that doesn't happen. It's only that one family that can make that happen, and they normally don't participate.
That's fair.
I think it's not a known risk. I'm sure it will be more likely attended next year, and people will be more likely to have brought dressing gowns in their backpacks.
Yeah. Or conversely, it would be very well attended.
But by a different crowd.
Yes.
Yeah,
At what point is that lowering the tone of your cooking competition?
it does. But then the anime itself has just random clothes off moments.
So much, I have to say. Look, I've watched some horny anime. I've never come across an anime that threw me every single time it got horny.
Yes, this is an anime that is not in itself horny. It has some awkward teenage romance is like the worst that it gets, and even that is like the awkward teenage pining kind of romance.
Yeah.
Except that at least once an episode, somebody eats food and goes off into an imaginative reverie, illustrating their inner reactions to the wonderfulness of the food, and without fail, these are extremely naked and extremely horny.
Except for a couple of times when it is literal children, as opposed to teenager children who don't count.
Yes, the teenagers get heavily sexualized in these scenes and at no other point, which
Yeah,
is
it's
itself a
real
strange
weird.
mix. There's a couple of points where there's a couple of like 10-year-old kids and they don't get nakeded.
I now question if that's like the Food Wars universe equivalent of like your demon settling is the first time you have the
The
foodgasm.
naked imaginings.
Like, do you tell people like I'm a grown up now?
Sorry, I'm just suddenly swept up by the Food Wars demon crossover universe, and it's wonderful. All these superpowers are their demons.
Oh, archaeology. Um, if you were not here for the dice roll, which I assume you were, but anyway, we've got an archaeological reading of Food Wars for you today, and we're just going to define that in specificity. So,
Mhm.
Archaeological reading can be used to mean a lot of things. One of the most prominent is actually using a reading of existing texts to understand what other texts must exist. So, like, could I glean the existence of the film The Omen or the book The Bible from the TV show Good Omens, which is itself an adaptation of a different book, which is based on, you get what I mean.
Right. Could you
That's
have
not what
worked
we're
out
doing
the
here.
Yu-Gi-Oh series based on the Yu-Gi-Oh fanfic?
I mean, I was
Did you is
aware
a
there was a
different
series.
question, but could you have? Would be an archaeological
Yeah,
question.
could I as an adult? Possibly. Me, age 7, I just accepted stuff. You do when you're 7. So much is already happening.
It's, nothing makes sense
You
at
remember
7.
being 7 when people just told you stuff and you had to just accept that and move on with your life?
Yeah,
Anyway, that's not what we're doing
that's not what
because
we're doing.
that would take so much. What we are doing is an archaeological reading in the sense of looking at a text to see what it can tell us about the society it came from. So,
Yeah,
a more common version of this might be reading Ovid's Metamorphosis to understand what we can about ancient Rome. And you would not, based on that text, assume that people were turning into trees and statues and dolphins left, right, and centre. You'd read between the lines more than that. You don't assume that the story is an immediate representation of the society as it actually exists, but that it
no,
contains within it beliefs and understandings about the nature of reality and social structures, maybe even physical structures, which are real in the world where that text was written.
yes, we're trying to take this text as a text that has been produced at a time and in a place, but the time and place were in the real world.
Yes.
And that sets our expectations of what was probably true about that time and place, but nonetheless, they produced this text which may have things that didn't really exist.
Yes. And that's not trying to find out things about the author in specific, it's about the broader society in which this text was created.
Yeah. It's saying what kind of society gives rise to the MCU, and what does that tell us about this thing called Hollywood?
So many things. Massive caveat to this episode.
Yes, please give the caveat. The caveat is important.
We are aware that Japan exists.
We do know of the existence of Japan. This anime was not our first discovery of Japan as a place.
No, that was Yu-Gi-Oh!
I do not personally recall when I first learned of the existence of Japan, but I assure you, listener, that I have become aware of it in my life.
Um, but my point is, we are aware that any question we are asking about the nature of Japan, this
We
is
could
not the
just
best
look
way
on
to answer that
Wikipedia.
question.
Right. Right. This is a stupid way to learn about Japan. Um, we are doing this as an imaginative exercise
This is
rather than as an actual investigation into actual Japan, because we could ask some Japanese people who are real and easily available.
even if they don't know the answers, they'll probably know more than I do after watching Food Wars.
Right. It's not intended as an educational, it's not a
Yeah.
documentary.
So we are doing this as a lens by which to view this text, not a lens by which to view Japan, and I think that is an important distinction to make.
Yes, please do not send us hate mail about how we're wrong about Japan. We know that's not what we're trying to be right about.
Yeah.
Also, please do not trust anything we deduce from Food Wars. If you have not previously heard of Japan, this is not a good way for you to learn.
No. If you want to learn about Japan, please go and do that. Don't ask us.
We are going to be wrong.
And I want to stress there are some I've got my notes in front of me. There are some suppositions I've put in there that I know are not true, but I think are interesting that you might get from watching this.
I'm excited to hear these.
Yes.
Because I have, of course, watched all of Food Wars at least twice, and Dia has watched selected episodes that I tried to choose on the basis of things that would have interesting setting points. So we skipped basically all of season 4 because it's just Food Wars happening one after another. But I picked episodes in season 5 partly based on which of these has the convenience store in it, which tells you that there's such a thing as a convenience store.
I also did watch a few extra episodes on top of the ones you recommended to me, pretty much at random while I was writing my notes, just to get some more Food Wars in there. So, this is going to be divided into two rough sections, one of which is quite short, but I think will be fun, and one which is quite long, and I think will be more analytical.
Okay.
We're going to start with the short one. The short one is about food.
I mean, this both makes sense and is very contrary to the anime, which is mostly about the food.
Yes, so
It,
If you were taking this text as an archaeological exhibit by which you wanted to glean something about Japan, probably the most interesting element of material culture is that it tells you a lot about the food systems and the social context of food that exists in Japan.
Yes, I think that is a fair reading because it's not doing anything particularly strange or it's attempting to depict basically either real Japanese cooking or real Japanese approaches to non-Japanese cooking in all the food it portrays. It's not trying to give you elf meals.
No. And it is actually, there was a food consultant whose name I have in my notes. He is a celebrity chef in Japan.
Also, we should say, beautifully animated. It will make you hungry.
It will. I watched almost all of it whilst cooking dinner because there's no other way to watch it.
Their sizzle sound effect technicians were really skilled.
Yuki Morizaki, that was the contributor who provided the recipes. Apparently he is a Japanese celebrity chef whom I had not heard of, but
I haven't, but I don't think I've heard of a single Japanese. I have now heard of a single Japanese celebrity chef. It not
yes.
being my field of expertise.
I also had not, but I did Google, like,
It's the way to find these things
who
out.
writes this?
Whose fault is this?
Who caused this to exist? So yeah, relatively realistic on the food side. I will say, Dia's life caveat. I come from a foodie family. I come from a family of people who work in hospitality.
Mhm.
I definitely grew up in the context of the food industry, like 90 to 100% of these characters.
Right. You also grew up around chefs and their ways.
Yes, and I will say, I do occasionally play a little game when I see TV chefs of how accurate is this, and in terms of like actual rules of reality, not very. In terms of personality, yeah, this is pretty accurate. I think that's more because real life chefs behave like anime characters than because this is making any attempt to behave like real life chefs, though.
Okay, interesting distinction.
So, the food culture in this is pretty global.
Yes, it's very international food from a.
It's
It's
very
from a
international
Japanese
food.
perspective, but it is actually very. There's lots of pasta. There's lots of like. There's a actually there's a lot of Italian. There's an Italian semi-rival character, so we get a lot of Italian, but there's also a lot of curry, um,
Yeah.
like Indian food.
There are characters from technically all over the world, and by all over the world, I mean several food hotspots.
Yeah.
There are main characters from Japan and Italy, mostly,
Yes,
and a
although
couple of Americans.
yeah, I mean, it becomes more clear the more you've watched. There's a main character who's actually from France.
Oh yeah, I had forgotten that. I actually did know
He
that.
has a fully Japanese name, so it doesn't like
Yeah,
stand out. But Rio is actually French, and of course, oh gosh, what's his name? This is my name being bad at names problem. There's a curry. Yeah, from sort of season two onwards, there's a you know supernaturally good at smelling curry and spices guy who
sure,
began as an Indian street kid. So
sure. Why not? Of course, he was a street kid.
right, he was
Um,
rescued by the curry teacher, who's a tiny girl,
of course. Anyway,
because
my
it has
point
to be
is,
when it's anime.
we do actually climax with the five great cuisines of the world, which is a very argued about but existent thing.
It's the first time it appears in the anime, by the way. It's
It
previously not
is.
been mentioned.
It is. I also, this is not the point at all, but it made me laugh. He mentions he's making a dish from each of the five great cuisines, and the dish he makes to represent France is a mille-pois.
He's just like some pastry.
It's not even some pastry. A mille-pois is
So yes, a
it's
mirror
like
fry, not a
step
milk.
one.
Yeah, it's
It's step
yes,
one of a recipe.
he does some carrots and celery and onions, and he's like, France, I have embodied it.
It's kind of like saying, like, to represent American cuisine, I will produce my meal, a deep fat fryer. You're just like, I'm not saying there isn't good American fried food. There's very good American fried food, but you do know
You
it's
haven't
not the oil that is the meal, right?
you have not actually produced a dish.
You have not produced a dish, you have produced a single ingredient.
Yes, it's
Not the point, but very funny to me. It's
mm.
so clearly there
They
is
had to
a
make a dish that was going to work, is the thing, and there was
they had to make a dish that was going to work, and also I did get the impression throughout the show that they're aware that French cuisine is very highly regarded and like world famous, etc. But the writers just didn't like it that much because none of the French dishes sound as good as the other dishes in the ones I
It's
watched.
never really showcased. There is a wonderful bit where they're like, "And now we will do French cuisine," and Soma is like, "Great, I've got these candied chestnuts that I was carrying around as a snack, and they're going to be the basis of my French venison dish."
Yeah, it's just
Which
like,
is not what you do when you fully respect the cuisine.
yeah, it's just like some stuff I had in my pocket. Here's some fucking celery. Eat up. La France. Again, it's not important, it's not a part of my reading, it's just very noticeable if you're watching this and taking notes on the food culture, you do start to notice how much they just don't give a shit about French food.
More damning, to be honest, is this is the only time we ever hear about because I think one of the great cuisines they mention is like Turkish or Persian.
Yeah, never come up.
This is the only time it is ever mentioned, or that
Mhm.
anything from that food culture is ever really made.
Yeah. And this is the thing. You can tell a little bit from this little point about Japanese food culture, which is you can make an assumption that it doesn't seem like a glaring omission not to talk about Persian or Turkic food culture.
Right. It is probably the case that that food culture is not heavily represented in the foods of Japan as currently eaten.
Yes. Whereas the fact that they do consistently return to and bring up French food despite clearly hating it indicates that it would be seen as a misstep to discuss the great foods of the world without including French food.
Right, and there's enough Italian in there that probably people have decided pasta and pizza are good.
Yeah. Oh, what is interesting is the stuff you can tell about the physical material culture from it. Like, one thing that I really noticed was there are quite a few dishes where they talk about seafood and wanting it not to be too fishy, or they talk about seafood ingredients in dishes that are not considered seafood, which are both really good signs that this is an island culture, or at least a
Yeah.
shore culture.
Yeah, this is a culture
Because,
where seafood is both abundant and therefore not prized for its seafoodiness.
yeah, like, you do not want to be eating fishy food every single day. There is a reason that up until relatively recently, like working contracts for servants in the British Isles specified a maximum
Maximum
number
of
of lobster they could be made to eat.
right, because actually if you are eating shellfish is fairly strongly flavored and it gets very samey very quickly if it is instead of a luxury food, a bag of oysters being your equivalent of a bag of chips on the way home from the pub, cheap street food. It's yeah, it's context. It's all context and yeah, fishy shellfish gets tiresome.
And you can say similar things about which foods are treated as of so abundant and obvious that they don't even need mention. Like quite frequently you will see the entire cooking process of a dish and then some rice will materialize next to it. Because the
Yes, the
production
rice
of
just
rice is just
happens.
not worth mentioning.
There is just also some rice here because of
Which
course there's rice.
indicates, naturally, that rice is an accepted staple of every single meal. Like, it might be absent, that wouldn't be massively noteworthy, but you don't need to mention that you're including rice the way that you might not need to mention that you're including salt or pepper.
Right. You don't need to justify your inclusion of rice as the basis for your whatever delicious sauce you've made.
Yeah,
Obviously, you can put it on rice.
exactly. You can tell a lot also from what flavors they discuss. I don't think a cooking anime equivalent set in the UK would use the word umami nearly this much.
No. Not even translating it to savory would it be quite that prominent.
No. Because we don't talk about the savouriness of dishes, it's just something that is not commented upon.
Yeah.
Not that it's
We
not
would probably,
excellent,
though,
it's just not
say things
notable.
like meaty much more than they do.
Exactly.
Even for dishes that didn't have any meat in, we would talk about making your mushrooms seem meaty.
And I have to say, this is just me being a vegetarian about it, but oh my god. Even the people who we're told are like, "Oh, specialises in subtle vegetables," are just like, "And here is an entire chicken thigh."
Right, but one that's flavoured with subtle vegetables.
"Oh, the subtle vegetable flavour will inform how the beef tastes." Well, it's gonna taste of beef, isn't it? "Oh, the subtle vegetable flavour, that is an entire fish."
It's
Um,
true, actually. Various of the most praised vegetable dishes are steamed vegetables around an entire fish.
it's very notable because it's not that there aren't any vegetarian dishes in the entire show, there are. Most of them are desserts, but they are there. Um, it's that meat is very much a centerpiece, which
Right.
can
Everything's
be
got meat
taken
or
in
fish
several ways.
in it as a rule.
Yeah. You could say that this is a society, therefore, where the acquisition of meat or fish is a sign of high value, that
Because it's
maybe,
in all the gourmet stuff, yeah.
yeah, or that maybe it might be conversely of society where meat and fish is so abundant as for it to be odd if it is not included.
In the same way as we're trying to make the fish less fishy because we eat fish every day,
Yeah.
there's always some form of meat or fish in the dish, so obviously there's just always there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
could see that.
Either of those could be true of the society that produced this show, because we are only really seeing high value food,
Yes.
even when we are seeing high value versions of staple foods. This is sort of the main crux of the dish in the second episode, which is essentially fancy eggs and rice.
Yes, but it's been fancified, it's been gourmetified.
And it has been gourmetified by adding chicken.
Yes, fully. We put chicken in the eggs and rice, and now it's good.
How do you make egg fancy? Introduce the mother.
Well, now you've made it creepy.
I don't eat chicken. I don't have to feel weird about it. Yes. I will say also there's very little reference to dietary restriction, which is not unusual in cooking shows. Even cooking reality shows don't tend to introduce it very much. But it is interesting if you think about this in the context of a cooking school where people are being trained to be chefs.
Right, and there is, and you're right. There is even in the full. Even if you watch every episode, which I have done, uh, at least twice. There's, I think, maybe one mention of allergies, and it's offhand someone reporting back on a scene we didn't watch.
Yes.
There's nothing. There's no make gluten-free pastry course.
I'm just saying their entire education at this school does not meet the rigorous standards of the Great British Bake Off.
But it would be great to make them do Mexican Week.
Oh God, Paul
They would be
Hollywood's
at least
version
as
of a
good at it as
s'more.
the British Bake Off.
Oh God, I'm never going to emotionally recover from Mexican Week. Um,
I wisely decided I did not need to watch it because I saw online reactions and I was like, you know what? I get the gist.
That's very valid of you. But yes, and you can guess a lot of things from the fact that it doesn't look at dietary restrictions. You can, for example, say, well, this is maybe not a society that cares
Caters to them
deeply
well.
about catering to dietary restrictions. You could also say this is a society where there are fewer dietary restrictions, which is a thing that happens. Like rates of vegetarianism, rates of allergies, rates of gluten tolerance are all flexible across societies, and nobody really knows why.
Sure, and it also you of course have the issue, not the issue, but the difference, demographic difference of how much immigration there has historically and recently been will in turn affect like your religious restrictions and your cultural restrictions.
Mm,
Uh, if you're taking a bunch of English school kids to France, you do need to mention that the menu should not be based around horse, not
yeah.
because they're in any way allergic to horse or even religiously opposed to horse meat. It's just a cultural we don't tend to eat horse meat. It upsets people thing.
Yeah. We had a whole scandal about horse meat, which everyone I
Horse
know
scandal.
in countries where they eat horse went, "Oh, what's the problem?"
Right,
Like, this
they were
is
very
just a labeling issue.
right. They understood that labeling the beef as horse was not the horse as beef was not great because the labeling was wrong, but they did not understand the why are you so horrified at the idea that you might have accidentally eaten horse.
I do remember being very smug as someone who did not eat beef because I wasn't a vegetarian at that point. I just specifically didn't eat beef.
You were like, I'm fine. I've never eaten the horse.
Oh, I felt on top of the world. You've eaten horse, you've eaten horse.
We have not seen horse eaten in Food Wars.
We do not. There are lots of dishes that we do not see eaten. I have decided not to go through all of them, but I am going to flag up a couple of. I do have a list in my notes of a couple of notable ones. We can dive into
Mhm.
that now. Um,
Yeah.
Dairy products, really fascinating. Dairy products exist. We witness dairy products. We see a lot of butter, a reasonable amount of cream, bit of milk,
Yeah.
bare minimum of cheese.
We see cheese in the Italian dishes and mostly as a garnish.
Yeah. And the cheeses we do see are actually really interesting. So this is a cool thing you can say about cultures which don't have a huge dairy culture, is it tends to surprise people what cheese is the least popular in most of them.
Mm.
Parmesan, most places that have any kind of fermented foods are fine with like strong cheeses, parmesan, blue cheese, all of which we see in this.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense because if you think about sort of something like miso paste,
Yeah.
it's got a lot of the same notes as a strong cheese. You could use it in similar ways in terms of put a spoonful of it in the sauce and let it permeate.
Exactly. I've heard this is stepping out of character and being someone who's heard of Japan again for a
Go
moment.
for it.
I've heard comparisons of Japanese people between natto, fermented soybeans, and strong blue cheeses, which I don't personally see as someone who's not a huge fan of either, but I can kind of get where you're coming from with it.
Yeah. There's a particular sort of acidic kick to strong cheese as well, which
Yeah.
would tally with other fermented things.
And we do see strong cheeses in food wars. What we don't tend to see is the milkier, softer cheeses. There's not much cheddar, there's not much mozzarella, there's not really like a gorgonzola even.
No one's ever eating feta, no.
No one's eating feta or edam. We're not seeing cheeses that are considered mild to a sort of cheese eating culture.
Yeah.
And
We're
I
seeing
have
ones
heard,
that have got a lot of fermented flavor, but not a lot of the taste of milk.
exactly, yeah. And I have heard, again, this is all secondhand information from random chefs, that mozzarella in particular and sort of those, that, I'm using mozzarella as a sort of emblem of an entire family of cheeses because I'm not going to sit here and list them. But that kind of cheese, the kind that comes in a little sachet of liquid and is terrible and
Your wet
milky.
cheese.
Wet cheeses, which is a horrible turn of phrase,
Sorry.
are the ones that tend to really ick out people from a very low dairy culture because it's like off milk, which it is.
Because it's coagulated milk.
Yeah. And I understand why. If you are not a cheese eater by upbringing, you would go, what? No, that's what happens to milk when you let it go nasty. I don't want to eat that.
Right. I mean, broadly speaking, coagulation is not an appetizing term.
No. Nobody wants to be told that their dinner is freshly coagulated.
Right. And I see how that might make burrata somewhat unappealing, because it's
Yeah.
literally just we have made the milk stiff, and here it is.
Yeah. So yeah, no, the dairy is an interesting one because you can actually tell quite a lot, which is that this is a culture that has historically not had either any or large amounts of dairy, but has had it introduced because we see it in foreign cuisines and we see it minimally in native cuisines.
Yes,
So these things
it's
have been introduced, they have been welcomed in some forms, but there are certain elements of it which are unappetizing still.
yeah, cheese is foreign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is interesting because it tells us something about the culture. We also see what ingredients are considered relatively rare and which are considered ubiquitous. We see dried ingredients being shipped to Megumi, is her name?
Yeah.
We
Megami is
see,
great. She's the one who is nice.
yeah, it's. I love how in school animes you can have a character who is just the one who's not a dick.
Right. Megami is the nice one.
Yeah. We see dried ingredients being shipped to her, which tells us quite a bit about seasonality and shipping and how food is transported because shipping fresh vegetables to someone is an ordeal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We see foods from other food cultures like olive oil that are considered like emblematic of that food culture. There's an entire character whose deal is that he's an Italian guy who carries olive oil around everywhere.
Yes, it's interesting to see which ones are picked as the emblems of those foreign cultures, because I don't think we would pick olive oil as the teller of Italian cuisine.
I
We
mean,
would pick
this
tomato.
I think I would, and this might be a foodie background
You're a foodie
versus
person though. I'm just a
yeah,
regular person.
exactly, yeah. But like we see that that is something that is prized, and olive oil, its positive qualities are fairly specific and unique, and we can therefore say that these qualities, delicacy of flavor, sort of richness in cooking, frying and delivering a certain like quality of fry,
Mm.
are all qualities which Japanese culture values in food. Therefore,
Yes, and certainly at the very least attends to.
yeah,
Like this is a food culture in which you would notice the difference between olive oil and other forms of oil as the base of something.
precisely. So all of these are things we can tell from food culture, and there are a few like really fun little things you can tell from food culture, like the way it talks about, for example, Vietnamese food in one episode versus the way it talks about French food, which I've covered. Again, I'm not
There's a
going to go
certain
into a
lack of
huge amount of
respect with
detail.
French.
I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in this segment. I just want to point out, from an archaeological standpoint, this is a deeply rich text because food culture tells you so much about a culture and a world.
Yes, food tells you. I mean, you've touched on most of these things, but it tells you a lot of stuff about the climate, the seasonality of the climate, the transport options, the quality of the soil, what kind of animals are being raised, whether the animals are being slaughtered. If you've got a food culture where they eat a lot of sheep's cheese but not a lot of mutton, what that tells you is they're not slaughtering the sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah, all sorts of things. So there is a lot. If for some reason you are listening to this from the far distant future and your only evidence of Japan is anime, I recommend this one as a source text for actual Japan
Please
because
write
at
that
least the food is
dystopian
pretty
novel.
good. The food is
Please
pretty
write that
real.
dystopian novel.
The painstaking reconstruction of Japanese culture via the food on display in this cooking anime. I would read it. I don't think I've
That would
got the
be
skills to write
incredible. I love an archival novel, I'm just saying.
it.
Now that's epistolary, baby. Anyway, um, aside from if I have a minute, I am gonna just
Oh,
curve back
please.
to the disrespect of the French because I do think it's deeply
Very
funny,
funny.
and I also think it's quite telling in ways that are interesting to me. Because,
Speak.
okay, I'm speaking as a Brit, but I am also speaking as someone who has grown up in the food industry for my entire life. I know chefs from all over the world. I know people who specialize in cuisines from all over the world. A thing this show doesn't really touch in is a lot of people actually do specialize in cuisines outside of their own. I know a Cornish chef who, for a long period of time, specialized in Danish food. Like, it does happen.
Yes, in
Um,
this anime, if there's a specialist in a food, they are from that culture. Yeah.
yeah, like the only Thai specialist I know is English, despite the fact that I know multiple Thai chefs who just don't consider themselves specialists in Thai food.
Yeah, I think the only exception in this anime is that there are a couple of Japanese characters who specialize in Chinese.
Yeah,
But Chinese has a special place in this series as the big neighbor.
yeah.
So,
And also, Chinese people are shockingly absent from all mention when it comes to Chinese food. They're not completely absent, but they are not here to give opinions about their own cuisine.
no, all the other cuisine experts are from their country of origin. The Chinese cuisine experts are Japanese.
I think the impression given here, and this is very similar to the French point I'm going to touch on, is like, you know what Chinese food is. Come on. You don't need us to walk you through it. It's not interesting and exotic. It's great because it does slightly have the energy of like, it feels like there is an alternate version of this, which is like those American movies where they go to China and learn to meditate and kick people, except it's just like two Italian boys who go to Japan and learn to lose culinary battles over their kitchen equipment.
Yes.
Like, I have so many questions about what's going on with those guys. None of
This is
which
why
are
we have
answered. I did go and check if it was answered in the episodes I didn't see, and I was like, no, none of my questions were answered.
they just have a complex relationship with everything. I mean, each other, the
There's so
hero,
much going on.
school, food in general.
Life, really.
Like they're troubled kids.
My point is, anyway, um, again, coming at this from a foodie background, French cuisine is given a throne atop world cuisines that I would not necessarily agree is fully earned. Not
I
because
am
French
absolutely willing to hear you dunk a little bit on the French.
I'm not saying French food is bad. I mean, I am saying I am very loose on the vegetarianism in France because once I was given a French vegetarian option that was 2 carrots. But
I have heard, to be fair, parts of America are also like this, so it's not just the French.
yeah, I have also had horrible vegetarian options in Scotland and Italy and China and India. Like most places I have been, I have had at least one terrible veggie option offered to me. The only reason that doesn't happen to me in the UK is because in the UK, well, outside of this one trip to Scotland, usually I know where to go to avoid that eventuality, not because it isn't here.
Right, and also, to be fair to us, and I mean that in the most objective sense possible, that is partly because, due to your personal cultural background and mine, literally a big plate of deep fried potato constitutes dinner.
Yes.
And it
And
could
it's a
be
good
said
dinner.
that going to the chippy and just getting chips is not a great vegetarian option, in that if you had not encountered this before, you might feel underserved by this offering.
Though I will argue that no matter what culture you are from, if you are given 2 carrots for dinner, you're not happy.
2 carrots, always bad. I'm just
Unless
gonna
you are
say
a
that
rabbit. That is
no,
not a
two
dinner
carrots
option.
2 carrots and other forms of the salad is vegetarian and therefore it's lettuce for dinner
Yeah,
always is a bad option. I am just saying that perhaps we have a cultural specific thing where we're like deep fried potato and nothing else is an acceptable vegetarian dinner.
is fair. Though, and I will also say, lest I sound like I am praising the UK for its vegetarian options, the most recent terrible vegetarian option I had was in Scotland, and I was at a dinner and I asked for the vegetarian option, and the waiter came back with a plate that appeared to have some kind of pie on it, and I asked him what it was, and he said vegetables, and then walked away, giving me no further information, only for
Mhm.
me to open the pie and find out that it was cheese. There were no vegetables in it. He was just wrong. Clearly, I was the only person who had asked that question, otherwise he would have known the answer.
Mystery pie for the vegetarians, but crucially not the vegans. The vegans get the 2 carrots.
If I had known it contained only actually, that's not true. It did contain 2 peas, I counted. Um, if I had known that was a vegetarian option, I would have asked for the vegan option and been happy with the carrots.
You didn't like a cheese pie.
I did not like the cheese pie. I'm not the biggest cheese fan. I'm with the people of Japan on this one. Anyway, my complaints about French food aside, my personal complaints about French food aside, I think French food having this kind of top of the world pinnacle of creation aura is unearned, not because French food is bad, but because that is not a thing that can objectively be measured.
Yes, I have a theory about that one if you'd like to hear it.
I'd love to hear it.
It's the Michelin food star thing.
Even oh my god, it's I have
It is literally the pinnacle of, culinary excellence is to get a Michelin star, and the Michelin corporation food people think French is the best and are more likely to give stars to French style restaurants even outside of France because what the Michelin star people really like is having a strong cultural cuisine and then doing that cuisine and not doing anything fancy or fusion like or modern with it. Which is why now I think the second most starred city in the world is Tokyo after Paris. And a lot of it is for the Japanese restaurants because there are a lot of very purely Japanese restaurants doing things they've been doing for 200, 300 years unchanged, which is the sort of thing the Michelin chefs like. Um, but because that is a French oriented culinary guide, that has become the pinnacle of cooking is the French style.
eminently plausible to me. I do also think there is a looming spectre that we are not acknowledging, which is colonialism and the legacy thereof.
We should
Um,
probably talk about colonialism. Yes.
yes, I'm not going to go into a huge amounts of depth in colonialism, and actually, to
we should
simplify things, I am going to talk about colonialism in like a really specific context, which is there is a reason we call cow meat beef.
There is a reason we call cow meat beef. Would you like to explain to the listener, who may, to be fair to the listener, not be steeped in stories of the Norman conquest the way we were, and may not actually know why cow meat is called beef?
So this is the thing. Linguistically speaking, we used to be a purely Germanic language. Well, not purely, there's no such thing as purely, but you know what I mean. A very less French Germanic language that
Hmm.
had lots of old Germany words. And then the French arrived and invaded and took over, and suddenly all of the posh people spoke French.
Hmm.
And while, to cut a very, very long story short, eventually these things all merged together as languages tend to do, and we got something close to modern English.
We've got a sort of language soup going on.
Yeah, what did happen in that period is French words for things became associated with the higher classes of things, or the things that the upper classes interacted with, while
Yes,
the
laws,
German
for
words,
instance, were written in French.
exactly, whereas the German words became associated with lower class things and the things that the lower classes did. Amongst other things, most animals being raised by peasants retained their Germanic names, and most food being eaten by rich people gained French names. And that's
Thus,
why English has a lot of different words for meat as opposed to the animal it comes from.
to the point where English kids are a little bit weirded out when you discover that in many other languages the word for the meat is the same as the word for the animal.
Yeah. And
Because
also
it seems a little bit unseemly to us to not have that distancing that the animal is a pig and the meat is pork.
why I think even as adults a lot of English speakers are distressed by the word Schweinfleisch for pork.
Right.
That just
Pig flesh just doesn't
I don't like
it
it.
seems unseemly. You're supposed to have a little veil over what the meat actually
I
came
feel like
from.
I'm looking at it naked.
Right.
It's not
It's
nice.
impolite.
But yeah, this isn't unique to English. This is like a thing that happens sometimes in many languages. What's fairly interesting in English is how ubiquitous it is. Like there are lots
Yes.
of languages where like there are different words for meat and animals. It's English is fairly interesting in that they're from like, different linguistic families and also pretty universal. There's very few animals in English which are also their meats. And they tend to be
Basic.
exotic animals that weren't around at the time of the Norman conquest.
Right. It's either, well, to use a couple of birds, it's either guinea fowl, because we didn't have those, or it's chicken, because you could actually afford to eat those.
Yeah. We don't have a fancy Norman French word for emu meat because the Normans were not eating many emus.
Although they would if they could.
Oh, they would love to eat
If you
emus.
become a time traveler, listener, and you're trying to find yourself a lucrative grift using the knowledge that you have, import emus
It'll be way
to
easier than trying to get an electricity grid set up.
right. Don't worry about the whole solar generator plan. Electricity is useless without the devices to use it anyway. Simply import some exotic animals, start yourself an emu farm, and become provider of emu flesh to the great.
Yes. The point of all of this discussion of emus is that for a really long time in England and in much of Europe, French was associated with the nobility. It was the language of the nobility, even in countries that had not been conquered by the French or the Normans,
It's
who
true.
were French.
Um, through a
Um,
combination of diplomacy and intermarriage.
yeah, the French were really good at marriage alliances in a way that I do not fully understand as someone whose historical studies ended circa the 14th century, but they were just playing that game, man. They were getting into every crown jewel in Europe.
And through a combination of these matters, sort of French became the language of aristocratic diplomacy, the way that English is now the language of trade.
Yeah. And French cuisine became the higher class cuisine where national cuisines outside of France were reduced to the peasantry. And that doesn't mean there wasn't also peasant food culture in France, distinct from the sort of court haute cuisine
Oh,
stuff.
absolutely.
But there's a reason haute cuisine is called haute cuisine, high cooking.
Right. And high cooking in the French style became the courtly manner across much of Europe.
And it remains the fact that a lot of upper class foods across Europe and across the world that was conquered by parts of Europe and occupied and generally affected, even if not
Mm,
uniquely and specifically the victims of colonialism by Europe, you
mhm.
probably had a neighbour who was. The
Yeah.
idea of upper class behaviours of Europeans was seeded fairly widely across the globe.
Yeah, I mean the most obvious modern equivalent is if a Japanese and a Chinese businessman go to meet, they're probably both wearing Western suits
Yes.
because
And
that's what you wear to be business.
exactly. And so, in this context, French food is spread around the world as the food of the rich and discerning.
Yes.
And I don't believe that that legacy has ever been shaken. And I don't think that means that French food isn't good. French food is great, even when it is 2 carrots. The person sat next to you is having lovely venison. I'm not down on French food. I just don't think any cuisine has earned that like little crown that French food currently has.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Is that there is that at first continental and then almost global. Like this is the queen of cuisines. This is the correct way to treat an ingredient is the way the French would treat the ingredient.
Yeah.
This is the nature of how courses should work in a meal. This is the nature of you know you confit garlic because that's the best thing you could possibly do with garlic, even if you're not doing French food with it. Kind of attitude.
Like I was taught to cook like fairly like I don't know if the word is classically, but like I was taught proper old-fashioned fancy cooking. I know how to like prepare my own fish from whole, etc. And I was always taught French style because that's how you teach people to cook, even though I am English and I live in England.
Yes, it's just this is proper cooking in a sort of emotional sense.
Yeah, I was taught how to cook with a mirepoix, not a trinity.
Yeah, I was taught how to cook with an onion. This is the difference between us.
Yeah. This is the difference between cooking by people whose job it is to cook and cooking by people who want to eat dinner. One of them takes 5 times as long.
Well, crucially, I was taught to undercook the onion, so yes, it was very much the problem.
I will say that is my biggest sin as a cook, is I undercook stuff because I'm hungry.
Any sauce that takes longer to cook than the pasta does will be served raw.
Yep. None of us is without sin, is what we're establishing here.
We are, in fact, culinary sinners.
My point anyway being, how these other cuisines are treated is really informative. For example, you can tell from the way that French cooking is treated as uncontestedly high value and quality despite the obvious disinterest of everyone involved tells you that that form of European colonialism happened, because how else would this situation occur?
Yes. And I think there's also, we don't meet a lot of French people, I feel like, but everyone we meet who specializes in French cooking is a complete snob who no one really likes.
I mean, this is how the French are portrayed in many cultures.
Right, but I think it's interesting that it's like, on the one hand, they have the best food, like objectively, their food is the best. But on the other hand, you would not want to spend time with them.
Yes, nobody likes them in the world of food wars. Nobody likes any French people. It's also, I think, where fancy people go when they, like, abandon their families. France seems to be popular for that.
Right. I mean, in much the same way as there are a lot of flats in London that are not owned by Londoners, I suspect there are a lot of what, because they are rich, we must describe as expats in Paris.
Yes. The only difference is Paris has better rent control.
They have probably literally got gilded chandeliers.
Oh, yeah. So
Anyway,
yeah, as you can tell from the attitude towards France and the French, I think you can establish that this kind of European colonial hierarchy existed. And I think that's also very interesting in how Italian food is presented, because Italian food is presented as high class and exotic and interesting, but also as approachable in a way that French food is not.
I think Italian is specifically presented as a peer.
Yeah.
Like
Italy
this is a
is
it's
like us.
presented as right. It's like us. This is a country that has its own deep and layered culinary history, which has produced things on par with the things we produce, but different. Hard to relate to directly, but quite tasty, and fundamentally they're the same kind of, the Italian chefs at the school, the two brothers, are treated as just as equals in a way that French is not treated as an equal. The French people are treated as snobs. The French food is treated as unapproachable, but Italian is like a cousin.
Yeah. And you can contrast that with the Chinese chefs, with the mentions of Vietnamese food that come up a few times, or Korean food. The way Americans are presented in this is frankly hilarious. They are very appreciative of good food, but have no knowledge of it.
And also, this one American girl, and she's just naked all the time.
She is. There is a
She's
naked
wearing the
American girl.
tiniest bikinis to cook, like very tiny short shorts and
Yeah.
very underfitted bras.
Yeah. And apart from her, all of the American people we meet are there to praise other people's food. That seems to be the only pastime Americans have in this universe.
They are unsophisticated and easily impressed.
I don't know if they're necessarily unsophisticated, given that we only ever see them having good food. They are just very easily impressed.
They're
They are
easily
incapable of
wowed by the butter.
producing quality, but they admire it greatly in others, you know? They take direction well.
Yes.
And, like, this is not us dunking on Americans, because the British
This
don't
is
even
the
make the
anime.
cut. We don't even appear.
There are no British people and no British foods in this
At
entire
no point in
5-season
the
show.
production of Food Wars did anyone think, "Oh, maybe we should showcase British food," because
Not
why
even so
would
much
they?
as the appearance of a cheddar. There is nothing.
They don't even have, like, some fucking Aberdeen Angus beef.
They don't even have the cheese, and if we have produced anything that the culinary world at large can appreciate, it's the cheese.
And look, I just wanna stress, I am a die-hard defender of British food. It is, like, the only political topic I get into fights about on the internet.
But
Duck
there's
can
no
confirm
pork
this. I
pie
do
week.
that on a regular basis.
But there is there is no pork pie week on Sokugeki no Soma.
Oh my god, I would die. It would be amazing. I want to see the British food episode so much.
I want them to try making fish and chips. Do we?
Oh god. Have you ever seen restaurant quality fish and chips? It's the saddest thing.
I know. It's
No,
like
I want to see them make stargazy pie.
with the heads still on. No one
And jellied eels and mash.
things that people no longer eat because they're quite labor intensive and not as good as not doing that.
problem with British food is all of our like aristocratic food is really, really old because we stopped doing that when we got invaded by the French, and all our aristocratic food became Norman French food.
Right, and
Um,
there were some things that we were sort of like Elizabethan
yeah,
um,
but
we used to be famous for roast beef in the sense of spit roasted, which we don't really do
yeah,
anymore.
but acknowledging that, I can acknowledge all of the historical facts of British food and the fact that I actually love British food. I think we have really good food here, and also like accept that it is maybe not the most exciting cuisine to the average Japanese anime watcher.
That's fair. Right,
But I do think it would be funny if there was a British food week.
it would. I am perfectly willing to believe that the reason that British food does not make the cut is that British food simply has not made the cut as an import in Japan. That seems
Yeah,
plausible.
I'm completely fine with that. I just think it would be funny if there
It
was a
would be
British food episode.
it would be very funny.
Produce for me the perfect Walker's crisp.
Oh, they
I
would
want to see them try and make a Tunnocks tea cake.
I don't think you can make those without a factory. I mean, you can make a sad imitation, but I don't think you can make the real thing.
No, it's like when Great British Bake Off did s'mores.
Right, and they produced something that was in no way a s'more. The
They
Tunnocks
produced
tea
something that
cake
would be
is
called a
fundamentally a product
s'more.
of industrial production, and it's
Yeah,
wonderful, and I love them, and they're very bad for
I
me.
miss them more than anything else I had to stop eating when I went veggie. It's like
So,
my number one
yeah,
sacrifice was the Tunnocks tea cake. So I'm taking a moment to fantasize about tea cakes.
I was taking a
And
moment of silence just to, sympathize with your loss because that is very
I
sad.
mean, listeners,
Listener,
if
go and eat a
you
Tunnock
could
tea
take a
cake in Dia's honour.
moment to just next time you eat a Tunnocks tea cake, think of your vegetarian and vegan friends and think of the sacrifices they have made.
And then enjoy that slight salty aftertaste.
God, I want a Tunnocks tea cake now.
Let's talk about food instead.
Yes, so, um, sorry, I'm just still imagining a British food episode. I'm picturing the close-up shot on the Stargazy pie.
with the little eyes from the
In like a
side.
side of mushy peas in a ramekin like they do in like posh fish restaurants where they're trying to make mushy peas not look disgusting by putting it in like a fancy pot.
The thing about mushy peas is they fundamentally don't look good.
No, and they taste fine. It's
It tastes
fine.
great.
Not
They're
everything
ugly.
looks good, but they're not haute cuisine for a reason. It's that they look like alien guts.
Yeah, then they dye it the most unnatural green, so you don't realize that
Then
it's actually a sort of yucky yellow color, and it is not better.
it's horrendous.
This, if you look at the ingredients on like canned mushy peas, there is so much blue dye in those things.
Yeah. Actually, the best mushy peas I ever had was made with yellow peas, and it came out like a really nice buttery colour. And I cannot describe
Mm.
to you how disconcerting it is to eat something that literally looks like herb butter
But
and
it's
tastes like
actually
mushy peas, but it was
mm,
delicious. It was really good mushy peas.
that sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm not like defending my British food is good stance all that well by saying like yellow peas mashed are good, but they are.
Well, first you boil them until very soft, and then you mash them. I'm helping.
This is not like an entire meal, unless I am at an even more disappointing than usual veggie option.
You go to one of those chip shops that still uses beef dripping. And you're like, here the vegetarian option is the peas,
At least I would get like a gherkin, right, with my peas.
maybe a pickled egg.
One pickled onion. Just a pickled onion and some mushy peas.
Oh, that's not a good dinner.
Still not the worst veggie option I've had.
At least you would get what you asked for and not be told that it was a vegetable pie and then it was cheese.
Cheese with 2 peas in it. The peas were the vegetable.
It's a vegetable.
Is it? I think it's technically a legume. A legume's a subcategory of vegetables.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know enough about words to
I
quantify
think
that.
it depends on whether you can win the argument that way.
That's fair. Um, anyway, so yeah, I did just like this is kind of the end. The reason we're vamping is that this is the end of the food section, and talking about food is fun. Um,
True.
but like, I think it is worth noting, and like also just in terms of like what prescribed rules of food we're told they are. Like, we get this especially from Erina, the God Tongue girl.
She's got very, very carefully enculturated and strict rules of how a dish should work and how a meal should work.
And these are mostly based on, from my understanding, like fairly high class classical Japanese food. Some are added in from other food cultures, but they're
Mhm.
all of like upper class foods. And a lot of the time, when we see people break those rules and produce good food, even to her god tongue, it is because they are
Sure.
making lower classes of food. So you can make quite a lot of suppositions about like the stupid rules by which the upper classes bind themselves. And this is a great transition into part two, the social structure.
Yes.
So
There's
if you have any other, like, stray thoughts about food you wanna throw in, like, now's your moment.
I mean, so many, but I'm always here to talk about class struggle. So,
Yes. I mean, honestly, like, I mentioned to Duck, like, my taste in cooking anime leans much more towards the, like, domestic and/or post-apocalyptic,
mhm. Share
than
with
the
me your
school sports
apocalyptic
anime.
food animes.
Just, like, competition anime is not my thing. I tend to skip the tournament arcs in most anime
No,
I watch.
sure. I merely wish to know of these post-apocalyptic food
S
animes
Oh,
because
no,
they
they
seem good.
exist and they're really good. I'll send you a list.
Thank you.
Um Right, my point being, this anime is about food and class, which are two of my favorite topics to talk about for hours. I actually had a really hard time restraining my notes for this one. So, without
Ooh,
much further ado, let's talk about class.
let's talk about class.
So, the main character of this is something I actually flagged up when I was writing up my notes and mentioned to you. The
Mhm.
main character of this, one of the things I found most interesting is that he at no point expresses any interest in learning the art of presentation.
He is opposed.
And this
Yeah.
isn't like a major part of my analysis, it's just something I thought was a neat character beat because it does encapsulate in a lot of ways that he considers himself the product of his upbringing in a way that he is very proud of. And his upbringing is that he learned to cook from his parents, his mother who loved to experiment in the kitchen, his dad who was the main cook for their diner. Um, and that forms a lot of his ideology about food and also his personality, which is very brash anime protagonist. .jpg.
Yes. But it does give him some fundamental, as rigid as Erina in many ways, beliefs about what food is and how it should work.
Yeah,
And his fundamental belief about how food should work is you should be given a plate, it should contain a meal. The meal should basically be one dish, maybe with some garnishes, and then you should eat it, and then you should be full.
yeah. This is not a stance shared by the majority of students at the school, because the majority of the students at the school, whilst they come from restaurant owning stock, they come from higher tier
Gourmet
restaurant
stock.
owning stock.
Yes.
There's one whose family owns an inn, I believe. There is Curry Boy, who was taken in by a kindly curry chef.
Yes, from there was raised in the world of fine dining schools.
Yeah, other than a few notable exceptions, most of the characters we encounter, even in what we are told is the relatively affordable dorm, are from, like, not necessarily top, but definitely top half of the tier structure tier
Yes, if they're
restaurant owning
family
stock.
restaurants, they are nice restaurants.
Yeah,
They are not running greasy spoons.
no.
I should define greasy spoon on the assumption that we may have some non-English listeners. It's a small local cafe, or it's a small cafe on a transport route that serves fairly basic
Mostly sandwiches and soup, but also other
sandwiches
stuff.
and soup, and also crucially all-day breakfasts.
Yes.
And it's called a greasy spoon because the hygiene standards may not be what you would hope.
As opposed to a sandwich bar, which is exactly the same but doesn't serve soup.
It doesn't serve soup or necessarily cooked breakfast, although quite often they will still do you a cooked breakfast, but it's in a bun.
There is a sandwich bar not far from where I live that has been open since my grandparents' day, despite the fact that it's directly on top of an open sewage leak, which has been there for just as long, which probably tells you how good the food is.
But also quite a lot about British culture.
It's just, look,
That's a
man,
thing that can exist.
they. I've never had a bacon sandwich that good anywhere else in my life. I would happily sit on top of a sewage leak for an hour to have that bacon sandwich.
That's a good sandwich. It's got to be.
I mean,
That,
that really tells you the quality of the sandwich
that
bar in
does.
question.
I'm convinced. Anyway,
Again,
anyway,
not really selling British food.
yes, but these characters are not running that sort of place. Their
Yeah.
families are running quite nice restaurants.
Yeah, nice restaurants, hotel quality restaurants at a minimum kind of
Yeah.
situation. And this means that there are a lot of preconceived class notions which we are not really told of, we are simply introduced to. And not being told, simply expected to understand, is one of the best signs in an archaeological reading that you are not being introduced to something that is novel in the world of the text.
Yes, you are expected to understand it because it is something that is familiar and normal to the people who are expected to be reading the text.
Yeah. So, for example, at no point in this anime that I'm aware of does it actually tell you the socioeconomics section to which any character belongs.
No, only by context.
You get that, and
Like you
it's
get
not.
their family owns this kind of restaurant or that, but you don't
Yeah.
get therefore they are rich or anything
We
like that.
don't really see money as a concept except in the abstract sense of places going out of business or being bought by other people. Like,
Yeah,
personal
there's
interactions with money aren't something that this is interested in.
no. There's like a couple of mentions early in series one about Soma spending too much of his allowance on like contest ingredients.
Yeah.
But even that is because his dad is absent-minded and will have forgotten to send him more money, not because the money isn't there.
Exactly. And high quality ingredients are referenced frequently, and it is implied that some people can afford them and some people can't, but that's never really spelt out. We're just
Mm,
told that this is high quality ingredient that should be celebrated because high quality.
yes.
This is interesting because
And
I cannot express how expensive some of the stuff we're looking at is.
they right. They are using the most expensive beef in the world
Yeah, like,
sometimes.
oh my god.
And that stuff is really quite expensive. I can't afford regular cheap beef, and they're throwing around slabs of like, Japanese
Yeah.
wagyu.
And like there are a lot of the Shokugeki, the food battles, fought over kitchen equipment. And one of the things, as you know, whenever I research something for this podcast, I like to go and read a bunch of reviews of varying levels of professionalism.
Hmm.
And one of the things I saw several people say was like, "Oh, well, does it really mean anything if they're betting like kitchen knives?" And I'm like, "Do you know how much a kitchen knife costs? Like a
A good
chef
chef
quality
knife.
kitchen knife? Like just one from a set. I mean, aside from anything else, then you don't have a complete set, which would drive any chef insane, and you'd have to replace the whole thing. But also just like one good kitchen knife.
I mean, what I
Like
can tell you is that I do not own any chef quality knives because I am a poor person.
I
In the same way as I do not eat beef, I do. I assume that you're in your life, chef's knives are treated as a more fundamental need than in mine.
Yeah, I would say I have quite a lot of kitchen equipment. Some of it is very good quality because we have it from when my family has owned various bars and restaurants.
Mm,
And I can say that when my family acquired those bars and restaurants, kitchen equipment is more of a sort of financial commitment than the physical building
yeah,
most of the time.
yeah,
Stocking a kitchen costs a lot more than buying a building. And
I
I
can
live in
believe
London.
this.
Like, I am named after the pub my family used to run, and that building definitely cost less than the contents of the kitchen.
Mm, I can believe that.
Yeah, like, this is not a low value prospect. I am aware of chefs who have been bought a single knife as a wedding present, and it was the single most expensive wedding present they got.
Yeah,
Especially Japanese kitchen knives, which are a law unto themselves. They are a whole order of magnitude more expensive than other cooking knives available in the UK.
yes, yeah. I used to read a like a restaurant review blog for the kind of person who goes on trips planned around going to different Michelin starred restaurants every night and does not appear to be aware that there might be a financial limitation. Um, and even she was like, and then I only bought this one knife from the Tokyo um like food equipment shopping street because they're really expensive.
Yeah.
So if she was noticing the price, they must have been really expensive.
There is a, like, Japanese, grocery store near me which sells Japanese knives, and the smallest knife they own, which is a paring knife, is 60 quid.
That's quite a lot for a paring knife, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I don't think it's technically a paring knife, I think it is a knife the same size as a paring knife that has a technical name, but it's a paring knife to my eyes. £60 for a paring knife.
Yeah.
My point being, oh my god, everything they are touching in this show is worth more than, like, most of my internal organs combined. Like,
Yes,
it
they
would
are
be
gambling
cheaper
over.
to just eat my liver than most of the dishes they are preparing.
Yeah, and the kitchen, the knives they are gambling over are also just like house deposit equipment.
Yeah, like, every so often I was encountering reviews that were like, "Oh, and, like, it's relatively low stakes, like, they're betting over things that are of sentimental value," and I'm like, "Sentimental?"
Right? Do you expect me to believe this knife is not itself the most expensive thing you own, and also necessary to your profession?
Like, how are you replacing that? Do you have the money to throw away on buying a new Mezzaluna?
Right, and the mezzaluna especially, which is this like enormous curved double-handed chopping like apparently it's an Italian style like mincing knife. I've not
I
looked it up.
I have one, I
But
have used it many times, I call it a demi-lune because we were a French language household, but, like, I think
it can't
ours
be cheap.
cost about 25 quid, like, and that's, like, a household one. It's a high
Yeah,
quality household one that, like, was owned by a family member who ran a B&B and had to have good quality kitchenware, but that's still, like, an expensive item in your house for a
yeah,
knife.
a single knife. They're school kids.
How are you placing this stuff if you lose it in a food battle? Like, how? Like, there are food battles where they bet, like, all of the equipment in their club's kitchen practice room, whatever they're called, and I'm like, "Okay, so you'll just never cook again."
To be fair, on those ones, that is the implication. Is they're usually gambling on the survival of the club.
Well, this is true, but, like, the impression to me was more like, it's an order of magnitude bigger than the survival of the club is the survival of your ability to continue to function as a sort of existent entity. It's not like, and this symbolic victory we will all back down. It's like, no, no, we will prove we're not going to do it anymore by giving you all of the equipment that we cannot replace.
Yeah, we are not going to go and make Curry Club 2 this time. We haven't lost yet. You are not going to be able to do this because you will no longer own such a thing as a frying pan.
But if anybody listening watches a lot of Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, there's like quite often on like scene where they lovingly pan over the new equipment Gordon Ramsay has just bought this failing restaurant, and
And
they
it's
like
like,
there's
well,
these.
actually, they're not going to fail then because you've just invested
Yeah.
50,000 quid into this.
Like, they do these, like, very slow, loving pans over the hobs and the, like, dials and the grill firing on and stuff like that, and it's like, it is very sexy, but also, if you're watching this with any knowledge of how expensive that is, it is so painful because 'cause you're just bracing yourself for the restaurant to fold, just like, "Oh my god, I didn't think I cared about Gordon Ramsay's financial situation, but is he okay? He's got kids, are they eating?"
I'm worried about these woks going straight to the clearance.
This
Yeah,
hurts me deep inside. I think most of it's donated for product placement reasons, but it's still, like, a lot of donation.
right. There's a lot of beautiful equipment going in the skip.
Oof, yeah. Like, even if you've ever had to replace, like, a household oven, you know how expensive that
Not
is, and
cheap.
that's, like, not a restaurant quality oven. So, yeah, no, my point is the fact that everything that they are touching and also the education that they are receiving, like, oh my god, good quality chefs cost as much as the kitchen equipment. Like, that's
And
the
also
most
Chef
expensive
Knight,
piece of equipment in your kitchen is the chef. Like, none
as
of
in
the
the person.
financial pressures, yeah, like, a good quality chef will bank a lot of money because it's a really high class, really high stress, and really, like, knowledge intensive job because you are not only being expected to produce art, you also have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of safety.
To be honest, although working in fairly different fields, I think there is a parallel between chef and surgeon,
Oh, absolutely.
including the tendency to be a bit of a diva.
Oh, yeah, like, it's a thing. Like, the over the top personalities of chefs are a joke, but they're a joke for a reason, you know?
Yeah. Of course, diva also a profession in which you have to train for a long time, have virtuoso skills, and do it on command.
And also, not kill people, which, unlike most jobs, you have to actively try not to do.
And this is different from the diva, who really shouldn't have to try that hard not to kill people. But
Yeah,
yes, both the chef and the surgeon can absolutely kill you by mistake. It's best not to think about this too hard.
yeah. Like, if you think about how easy it is to get just, like, regular food poisoning, you just never go outside again.
There are so many things you shouldn't think about for the sake of your health.
Yeah, but, like, my point being, like, these kids are training themselves in an incredibly high stakes, high stress, and expensive career, and it's just not really commented upon because we are expected to understand the value of these things. And we
Yeah.
are also expected to understand that to most of these people, the material value does not matter because they are from money.
Yes. Most of them, if they lose their knives, what they will do about this is call their parents and tell them the sob story about how they lost a cooking battle today, and also, can you send me some money for a new knife?
Yeah.
And then they will.
Okay. And I think it is notable that we see the characters who we are at least intimated are of a more low class background than others. We see putting the least sort of gleeful energy into, yeah, sure, I'll bet my cooking equipment.
Yes. They're more concerned that they might lose it if they do that.
Yeah. Um, but it's still never expressly mentioned. And that does imply, getting back to our archaeological standpoint, that there is value to these things, that these people are of different classes, and also that there is the infrastructure for that kind of value to matter. Like, if
Yes.
this was in, like, ye medieval times, we wouldn't expect the high quality of education or ingredients to be presented like this. It would be a very different matter because the way that tools of your trade are treated represents the kind of, like, mercantilism or capitalism or whatever other economic structure you're in expresses itself in daily life.
Yeah. Yeah, although I think there would be still I think it would be more explicit in the medieval um in the medieval AU of Cooking Wars, which again, somebody please make this.
Sure, that fan fiction
I
exists.
think I think it would be an explicit thing of your equipment is your profession,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you cannot start over if you have
And I
lost
think
all your equipment. The blacksmith who loses their forge and their hammers is no longer a blacksmith.
exactly, yeah. And that's something that, like, you can tell from the text in a lot of interesting ways. And also the way that food forms identity is part of this as well. Like, the Italian kids aren't just the Italian kids, they're the Italian kids doing the Italian cooking. It's kind of the easiest way to express that.
Yes.
Everyone else does some Italian cooking, but not like the Italian kids do it because they're the Italian kids. It's
Right, the
recursive,
the
you know?
Italian kids find a way to do the Italian cooking even when they're supposed to be doing the curry.
Yeah,
Everyone else might, as a one-off, do an Italian dish.
exactly. And it's interesting because this is from a Japanese perspective, and we do see that the ideas of, like, what counts as comfort food are grounded in Japanese culture. It's like one of the things that really caught me is in the episode where they are trying to save the mercantile quarter or whatever it's called, um,
Mm.
from being, like, destroyed by a new expensive chicken shop
Yeah,
down the
the
road,
the
which
shop
is
the shopping street's gonna go out of business, so they've got
yeah,
to clean the
yada yada
customer
yada.
back.
One of the things that came up to me was that, like, they were talking about needing food that could be eaten one-handed, and the immediate ideas they had for food that can be eaten one-handed, to me, don't even register as one-handed foods. Like, one of them was, like, a box with stuff on skewers, where I'm like, "That is a whole production, you've gotta have hands." Plural
You've
for
gotta
that.
have hands, you've gotta have napkins.
Like, they eventually fall on, like, an open wrapped thing, and again,
To me, it
that
seems like a
to
very
me
messy item.
yeah, that just doesn't seem convenient to eat on the go, man. You gotta close that wrap up. Because I come from a falafel eating background, you know?
Honestly, I come from a sandwich background, and my idea of how you eat things one-handed is where you do that thing where you have your thumb and your little finger under the sandwich to, like, prop it up, and then the other one's on top, so they just vertical things never quite register as one-handed items because the balance is wrong. But I can eat a triangular sandwich one-handed, which is that cultural thing. If you hand someone who never eats triangular sandwiches a triangular sandwich, and you're like, "That's a one-handed item," they're gonna be like, "Wow, this is floppy bread. This is not structurally sound to just if I pick it up by the corner, it droops. How am I supposed to eat this myself?" And I'm like, "Well, obviously, you use your little finger as a tripod," and they're gonna look at me like I'm insane.
Yeah. Oh my god.
And I feel like the open wrap is somewhere in that zone of if you are used to eating these.
Yeah, whereas to me, like, wraps are supposed to be closed because when I was growing up, the places that I got wrapped food on any kind of regular basis were a falafel stand and, like, maybe a crepe place on the way back from school as a treat. All of which are, like, closed things with a wrapper that you bite the top of.
Yeah, and we have to say here, falafel street food wraps,
Oh,
just the best thing. The
So good.
pickles and, like, the garlic sauce.
I've got to say, it's my one beef with Edinburgh. I lived there for like 2 years. I did not find a single decent falafel place.
Tragic.
Get your shit together,
Remarkably good
Edinburgh.
Italian takeaways, though.
Yeah, really good Indians as well. I didn't have a single bad Indian the entire time I was in Edinburgh. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
falafel options, disappointing.
We've got a pretty good falafel stand in the city centre here next time you visit.
Nice. My favourite falafel place closed a couple of years ago, and I like almost genuinely wept.
That is a very sad thing to happen.
I know there are other good falafel places, but none of them are Falafel King.
Sadness.
But anyway, my point was actually not my point, a different point. It really reminded me of, do you know the saga of the Hand Witch?
I have definitely watched the YouTube video about the hand witch.
Yeah, like I'm
Failure to take off.
embarrassingly familiar with the Hand Witch because I have spent hours reading about theme park food on Wikipedia pages because that's what
Everyone
I
needs a
do for
hobby.
fun. And that was all I was thinking the entire time. They're going, "What's edible with one hand?" I was like, "Oh my god, Food Wars does Hand Witch, please, please, please."
We have invented the bread cone.
They're finally going to do American cuisine and it'll be the Hand Witch. Okay, not the point, but like, as in, their idea of street food is different to my idea of street food. This is something that tells us about the culture. It tells us, among other things, that like they are comfortable with eating boxed food on the go or like open food on the go, which is something that like most French people would never consider in their lives.
Eating while walking is certainly a cultural thing that we see them to be comfortable with.
Yeah. Whereas like I once had like a sip of my coffee whilst waiting for a road for a road crossing in Paris, and a woman next to me genuinely went, "Ugh," like out loud. Like I know that's what Parisian women are thinking when they look at me, but they don't need to say it.
Really selling Paris here.
Paris is a lovely city filled with very, very judgmental women. And they're so well dressed that you can't hate them for being judgmental, because like I would too if I looked that much better than everyone. If I was that well dressed at like 6 o'clock in the morning getting off a night bus from London, I would also judge people.
It would mean you had your life more together than anyone else.
I know, right? Like if you look that good, like if your eyeliner is still sharp after getting a night bus from anywhere, you're allowed to be a dick. That's just the rules.
I shall bear this in mind should I ever attain this level of put togetherness, or more likely, be tutted at by someone else getting off a night bus.
Ugh, I know. Like I can't keep my eyeliner between leaving my house and getting to work, let alone driving from London to Paris. There's an ocean. But yeah, like we see, and like the idea of like what is diner food? Like the diner food to my eye as a Westerner does not look that significantly different, except in presentation from the stuff that we are told is restaurant food.
Right, it all
Because
seems
to
like it's
me,
broadly the
Japanese
same
food is
dishes.
food you get in Japanese restaurants.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have the distinction between this is low class food and this is high class. Yeah, this is a fried rice dish with a sauce on. This seems like it's the same thing as other fried rice dishes with sauce on.
Yeah, like I could kind of tell you, like, okay, this is the sort of food you would get in a petrol station that happened to do sushi, and this is the sort of food you would get in a Wagamama, and this is the sort of food you would get in like a fancy Japanese restaurant you treated yourself to. But, like, I don't know. It's just a vibe, you know?
It's mostly to do with coldness and how much plastic it's wrapped in.
Exactly. Like, it doesn't actually mean anything to me on, like, a one-to-one level. So looking at it in this is back to food culture, but it is also class culture. We can tell that there is a class divide between these characters, and we can tell that because of how they address one another, which
Yeah.
means that this is a society that has these class structures.
Yes.
And now, having said we were going to talk about it like 10 minutes ago and getting distracted by hand witches, I'm going to talk about how we can tell that and what we can glean from it.
Go for it.
So, a couple of bits here. One, um, the chefs of the night exist.
The chefs of the night. We only hear about it in season 5, but they do really make the show for me.
Yeah. I also love that. I don't know if this is just the version I watched, but the subtitles refer to them in French throughout. Les cuisinières noires. Which I just think is fun. The dark chefs, they're in French. None of them are French, but they're in French because they're fancy.
That wasn't true in the version I watched. That would improve it.
The version I watched, they were referred to throughout as the cuisinières noires, or the noirs, which is just very fun because it implies a certain level of fanciness to being a mafia chef.
Actually, no, they were referred to as the noirs.
Yeah, apparently it comes from cuisinière de noir, which is what they were called when they were introduced in my version.
The chefs of the night.
which I just find very fun and dramatic. Um, but we are told that they are the chefs for the mafia, and they are familiar with like various poisons and things like that, but also just do the cooking for like ye mafia bosses or
Right,
yakuza bosses.
it's sort of implied that they do poisoning kind of on the side because their primary business is sometimes ye olde mafia boss wants to have a really nice meal with his ye olde mafia deputies, and reputable chefs would not cater this event at his home, so he hires the chefs of the night.
Yes. Like, it is a very equal opportunity mafia in that it is mafia, yakuza, mob. It's like it seems to be a fairly global phenomenon. There is some kind of world union of night chefs
Right.
with a
This is the thing,
governing
though,
body.
the fact that there is not just underworld chefs, but that there is a hierarchical body of underworld chefs.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
what
Like,
really pleases me. They are having internal cooking contests to decide who gets to be boss of the chefs of the night.
it's deranged. And I will say this makes the show. But the thing that is interesting about this is it gives us a little look at organized crime in this universe, which is in and of itself fascinating
Mhm.
because the organized crime is not demonstrably different from the rich people we've seen, apart from more casual references to poison.
Right. Maybe different outfits. Not necessarily worse, but different.
Their behavior is not meaningfully different from the behavior of Erina's evil slash somewhat redeemed dad in series 3, whose only
Mhm.
crime appears to be being rich and mean.
Well, he's rich, mean, and a fascist.
Yeah,
But like a
yeah,
specifically gourmet style fascist. So he's not interested in conquering the world. He just wants to be the authoritarian dictator of chefs.
yeah. He has like about the same level of evil as the villain of Ratatouille, you know? Like, only if you care deeply about world cuisine, which I personally do, but I understand not everyone does.
And he only wants to be the authoritarian dictator of chefs because he genuinely has an angsty backstory, and he believes that by becoming their authoritarian dictator, he can save any of them from getting lost in the wastes of gourmet the way his, hero and friend did once upon a time.
Yeah, and also, like, the god tongue damage, which I'm not gonna get into, but there's so many layers of angsty backstory, all of which are cuisine-based. It's very strange.
There's so much happening. Like, Erina's dad, although a messed up dude, has reason to be messed up, you know?
Yeah. But my point being, there's not actually that much material difference between the behavior of Erina's family and the behavior of the mafia, yakuza mob people, the employers of the night chefs,
Hmm.
which is interesting because it implies to me, as the archaeological examiner of this text, things about this society. For example, it is richly hierarchical.
Hmm.
Those hierarchies are based not only on financial, like, acting power and buying power, but also on ritualized senses of class. And the idea of a criminal underworld is well established and, while feared, understood as a world which fits within those same mechanisms of hierarchical performance of class.
Hmm.
That is a thing about the world that you can glean from the existence of the night chefs, despite the fact that the existence of the night chefs is utterly cartoonish. And I think that's interesting.
The night chefs themselves also very cartoon.
They are deeply cartoonish, but they can still tell us things about the real world. Aside from anything
Absolutely.
else, this is like the idea of chefs who are side hustlers in poison is really interesting because this is actually a universal constant as far as I'm aware. If you look at like folk tales and urban legends and things like that, almost every culture has some amount of stories about food being messed with because it's an underlying fear that humanity has across the world.
Yes. The thing about food is it is we all it's not optional. The thing about food is we all have to eat it multiple times a day, which means it forms a large part of what we think about and worry about. And it means that sort of one of the primal fears is that either there won't be food, or just as scary, but differently scary because it would sneak up on you, the food is bad.
Yeah,
The food is poisonous, or the food has rotted and you don't know it until you try to eat it, or it makes you sick.
sure. Like
We're really scared of
everybody
food poisoning us because
we're
it
really
would be
scared of
bad.
food poisonings. And like I think every culture has at least some kind of like the one that's famous because most folklorists are American these days is like the Kentucky Fried Rat urban myth. But there are lots of like little urban myths about little food incidents that aren't a big deal, but like go round constantly.
Popular British one of finding a pet's microchip in the takeaway.
Yeah. They're also usually meat-based, which is very nice for me.
Because you're like, this will never happen to me. No one has ever microchipped a carrot.
Yes. It's like my fear is accidentally finding like chicken in my dish, not accidentally finding cat.
Yes, it's a different level because at least the chicken would probably be food safe.
Yeah.
You might feel guilty, but you wouldn't be poisoned.
Yeah. Unless I was like the guy from Super Size Me and just immediately threw up after eating one burger.
Sometimes these things happen.
It's a big old world. Some people can't handle a single hamburger. Some people are probably lying for clout and money to make world-changing documentaries that were forced upon us all in foods in health classes. Can you tell I was made to watch that film at school?
It was showing, yeah.
What a waste of life. They also made us watch 16 and Pregnant, so you know.
Warning you off two equally damaging lifestyles.
Yep. Don't have sex or hamburgers, kids. That's it. That's your health class.
Nothing left to live for.
Hamburgers also absent from Food Wars. But yeah, like this is interesting though, because you're seeing this like criminal underworld, and that implies a degree of establishment, a degree of fear, a degree of societal franchisement that allows for disenfranchisement. All of these things we know because the chefs of the night exist, even though the chefs of the night are in and of themselves extremely fantastical creations. Like they look like
Yes,
clowns. There's so
but no,
much
you're
going
right.
on.
The level of explanation they get is these are the chefs of the underworld, the criminal underworld. And it is assumed that you do in fact know the criminal underworld by reputation and what it is, and the various things that go along with it, like there will be a lot of violence there, things like this, which does imply that the people who this show is made for live in a world that has, or probably has, a criminal underworld.
At least has a pronounced fear of a criminal underworld, which isn't
Yeah,
actually the same thing.
no, it isn't.
Yeah, it's like how Americans are all scared of gang initiations, even though there's like been no evidence of them ever existing.
Yes, it's a gang sign, they say, of some kids doing a silly wave to each other on the bus.
Yeah, it's like, look, we have fears of gangs in the UK. It's just the fears we have of gangs are like that 14-year-old might have a knife, not that zip tie on my car means that there is a person of colour hiding under it to snap my Achilles tendons. It's just a different order of magnitude of alienness to me.
Yeah, and as you say, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are actually kidnapping gangs hanging out under your car armed with zip ties. But it does mean that that's a story your culture has.
Exactly. And this, to be honest, meshes with my understanding of like how stories around things like Yakuza and Mafia come to exist, which is those things exist and those things have hierarchies and structures because they're reflections of reality recreated by people who are set out from reality in some material way, whether deliberately or non-deliberately.
Mhm.
I don't know enough about the Yakuza to go into detail, and also we're pretending I know nothing about the Yakuza because I don't know about Japan.
Japan, the fictional country, no, sorry, Japan, the ancient country of which the only remaining remnant is this anime.
Yes. Based on my knowledge of other criminal subcultures and organizations, it isn't necessarily that they are set apart from society through broad scale societal disenfranchisement, but that they are usually set apart from society by creating their own hierarchies and structures which in some way replace or replicate those of the existing society. Which is why we turn back to Erina's food fascist dad.
It's a specialist form of dictatorship, but someone's got to do it.
Might as well be him. What's interesting here is we see Erina, we see her family, and they are not treated as unusual for either A, having this level of wealth and formality, or B, having this sort of supernatural god tongue.
Right. It's new to our protagonist because it's new to the audience. But every other character is fully ready to explain to him that, oh, that's Erina. She's got the god tongue. Her whole family is special.
Interesting, because this seems to me, we have this kind of very typical underdog story, but it's an underdog story in a world where supernatural abilities exist and supernatural abilities become more prominent throughout the show, but from day one we are told, oh yeah, some people are just born better at tasting.
Yes.
And my feeling is that this actually reflects a lot of class anxiety within the culture that produces this text, because there is a value for hard work and determination on show throughout this, right? There's a value for education. There's value. It is good to go and study your craft and hone your craft and give it your all.
Yes. As a cultural value that comes through very clearly.
But you can also simply be born better.
You can just be a blue blood of gourmet.
Yeah. And these ideas coexist in the text without analysis of how they clash with one another, or with a real sense that they clash with one another, which implies to me, as the archaeological reader of this text, that those ideas coexist in the society that produced it.
Hmm.
And this is the bit where this is functioning more as an explanation of how we do archaeological readings than really an analysis of this text. Because in terms of analysis of the text, what's interesting is how that's reflected and how that's portrayed and what those sort of complexities mean for the story. What I'm interested in here is what those complexity means for what we can say about Japan based on Food Wars.
Yeah.
Which is, we can say with some degree of confidence that this is a culture which has some degree of class and wealth hierarchy,
Yep.
and in which that class and wealth hierarchy is not widely challenged.
Hmm.
However, it is a society where hard work and determination and studying hard are valued and prized.
Yeah. Yes, they're considered worthy in and of themselves, actually. Even if you don't succeed as a result, it was still worth your
Exactly,
study.
yes. And the interesting thing is that it is not expected that Soma will sort of discard his attitude of being the diner kid. He's
No,
not
it's just you've
expected
got to
to
get better at
assimilate.
everything else in order to do your diner stuff.
Yeah, he's not got to assimilate into the working classes. He has to prove. Nope, just going to start that sentence again. He doesn't have to assimilate into the upper classes, he has to prove himself their equal.
Yes. And part of the way he has to do that is he has to learn the skills that they have learned.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting in terms of what does it tell us about the culture that this comes from? What anxieties is this expressing about class and education and values?
Mm,
Because the thing is, Soma, and to an extent Megumi and the other students in their sort of what we're told is one of the more affordable housing blocks,
mm.
what does their successes, what does their attitude, their culture tell us about what is expected of sort of rising stars from the lower and working class? Because we're told they were headhunted at the end.
Yes. Yeah, they all get pulled into high class jobs or apprenticeships.
Yeah. And also, they were brought into this on purpose by someone who was seeking out the best chefs of a generation.
Yes, there was a preliminary contest to pick the school kids who were going into the end contest, but everyone else was brought in as a candidate for the best chef in the world who will free me from my food-based ennui.
Because it is still leaning towards that idea of inborn talent, but it is also valuing hard work and also deeply aware, I think, of this sense of class as pervasive, but value as preeminent. I think is the only way I can think of to phrase that.
Hmm.
So, what does that tell us about the culture in which this was produced?
They've probably got some of that going on.
Yeah,
Yeah, not to state the obvious.
because this story is not really, as far as I am aware, about any of these issues, which means they were not added to the story in order to be about them.
Right, they're not even setting detail. They're things you can take for granted.
Yeah, they're background radiation of the world in which this story exists. And now I want
Yeah.
to take a really quick little detour to talk about gender.
Ooh. Doing class, we're doing gender, we're doing dinner. This is really my ideal date.
Oh, I think I've been on that date. It always seems to end up in a fancy pizza place.
Well, in
What is
this
it?
case, I suspect we're going to end up with some kind of rice bowl.
ah, What is it with cute lefty girls and fancy pizza places?
I'll let you know if I figure it out.
Um, been taken to several like upmarket pizza places by cute left wing girls.
It's a curse, really. It is.
My point is, there's something interesting about gender here, which is in like episode 2. We're shown Soma like hangs up on his dad, and before like and after he's hung up, his dad goes, "Oh well, the true secret to cooking is finding a woman you love enough to want to impress her with food."
Yes, this is a thread that goes through the entire series, sort of bubbling along in the background. The way
Yeah,
you really inspire your cooking is girls.
yeah, and this goes on,
One
and it's
specific,
quite
it's a
funny.
very monogamous approach, actually. The way you really inspire your cooking is you find the girl and then you cook for her.
Unless you are a girl, in which case you can cook for love of like other things, like your
Right, you can
home.
cook for your family or you can cook for your wife.
Yeah, family or wife. Those are the two things that can inspire cooking. And it's interesting because that's like this sort of bubbling thread that's not brought up like that often, but is peripherally present throughout.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, people get like there is the experience of food is sexualized. Let's go with
Yes.
um
In a way that is very insulated from any of the reality of the anime,
yeah,
actually. You
yeah,
you had a theory
definitely.
that it's because the sexy scenes have been mandated by the network, so
I
they've
mean, to be fair, I
hived
don't think
them
that's
off.
actually true. That's just how it felt watching it.
Right, it's honestly plausible because it is so separate from the material content of the anime. You could literally cut them out and lose nothing.
Like, I feel like it's unlikely that they were literally like mandated, like, you have to just add some sexy stuff. And he went, I guess when they taste food. I do think that's kind of how it feels watching it sometimes.
It does feel that way while they're watching it. I think no, I think in reality it's more of a joke.
Yeah.
It's like
Well, I
animes
think,
have some fan servicey sexy scenes, and in this case they're going to be sort of entertainingly stupid sexy scenes involving analogous food
yeah.
tasting
And
notes.
I think also on some level it is an attempt at being emotionally real because the experience of good food is hard to convey
Right,
through a
it's
visual
intensely
medium.
sensual
Yeah.
because it's a highly sensory experience with a lot of emotional um levers it can tug on.
And I think on some level, like, if you are trying to convey a physical feeling through a visual medium, soft porn is one of the best ways to do that.
I personally, this is my only disagreement with this theory. I personally cannot imagine the experience of eating, for instance, egg rice made fancy by the addition of chicken stock as feeling basically anything like floating naked through the clouds being chased by chickens.
This is fair, and I have to say, like, this is a very weird show to watch as an ace person because there is a peripheral bit of your brain
You're
going,
like, the food I understand, and then there's these other bits.
it's not even that, it's more there's a peripheral part of my brain that feels like every time someone has attempted to explain sexual attraction to me, or every time an ace person I know has tried to explain the lack of sexual attraction, they have gone to food metaphors, and I've always found them quite facile.
Mm.
This feels like I'm just trapped in that conversation aged 16 for a really, really long time, just going, "Okay,
You're age 16, someone is trying to explain to you what liking boys or possibly girls is like, and you were like, "This entire conversation feels like I am being dunked in the peanut butter by the tentacles."
yeah," like, it just feels like there's a lot of explanations of being ace that are sort of touted out as like, "Here, so you don't have to try and explain it yourself, just remember this explanation." That are like, "Well, if you're not hungry, it doesn't matter how good the cake is, you just don't want cake." That I've
That is
always
not
just
true to
found
my experience.
deeply unhelpful, partly because I'm not actually the biggest fan of cake, but mostly because I am also I don't think that is how sex works. It's not a biological need, so it isn't like not being hungry.
Right. Yeah, on a fairly basic level, it's a different thing.
Yeah, like I've always found sports metaphors and things like that much more helpful for expressing sexual feelings. Because on a really fundamental level, food is necessary to continued existence of you. Sex is necessary to continued existence of humans.
Do you know what? Do you want? I mean, you don't want another analogy, but I'm going to give you one
Sure.
anyway. It's a very quick one. You know when you've got a new book and you really, really want to read it, and you have to like do your normal life stuff instead.
Mm.
It's like that.
Yeah.
Wanting to do a thing is like wanting to do a thing.
We're not doing a Freudian analysis of Food Wars. I just had to
That's
throw
for
in
the best.
yeah. I just had to, like, throw in
So much here.
there's so much going on. And that's not the gender stuff I wanted to talk about. It's just it feels weird to mention gender without mentioning all the naked people and how it's really very equal opportunity, which I
Oh
appreciate.
yeah, the boys get naked to an equal degree. Like everyone
Yeah.
gets their genitals covered, and the girls get their nipples covered.
Yeah, and the boys just
Sometimes
don't
the
have
boys get
nipples
their nipples covered
sometimes,
as
which is
well.
a bit weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like, there's a lot going on with romance, even though it's not really a very romantic show, it's a show that has a lot of romantic and sexual
A lot of
side
people have
art,
awkward crushes on other people, which they
often expressed through the medium of cooking.
right, but they also, in a very true to being teenage way, they're either in denial about them, deeply furious about them, even though they acknowledge they exist, deeply resentful of their crush for not noticing without them making any effort, hopelessly pursuing them, got a weird homoerotic thing going on. I mean, my only explanation for Aldini's whole one-sided rivalry attempt is the little gay crush theory. I think it's as good as any other theory, given how much of everyone else's rivalries is about little straight crushes.
Mm.
But yes, it's interesting on the gender level that Megumi, in addition to being the nice one and the girl, so she's the nice homie girl versus Erina, who is the mean rich pretty girl who will step on you.
Yeah.
It is interesting that to me that Megumi's like food orientation, as she eventually figures out the kind of cooking that she personally is good at, is highly nurturing and vegetarian.
Yeah, and I also think what's really interesting with Megami is that quite often, so we see in a lot of the Shokugeki, the food battles,
Mhm.
there's these like imagine spots that are non-naked fantasies
Yes,
involving food.
of how people
And
are thinking
Megami,
about their processes, that all their
yeah,
fights.
and like they vary from like sort of just dramatic close-ups of people posing to like kaiju battles. And
Yeah.
Megami gets multiple Transformers battles, which I think they do come up a few other times. I didn't watch every episode. I did do some light googling. But
Mhm.
I feel like it's an interesting choice for her to have them multiple times.
Transformers as in giant robots or as in
Giant
transforming?
robots, yeah.
Interesting. What
Like,
do you think that's
there
about?
is I do not know, but I am fascinated. It seems to me like for the cooking is serious business in this universe, but
Mm,
the degree of combativeness does vary person to person. And the most combativeness does seem to be when there are cooking battles between the sexes, and Megami doesn't get to fight other girls very often. So
no,
it
and
could
not in the
just
kind of
be
detail that you get to her other
Yeah,
fight.
so it could just be an offshoot of that, which is that I did notice that the cooking battles between different sexes did seem to be more combative in the Imagine spots.
Yeah, yeah.
However, I don't think that actually explains why this girl in specific is associated with like Gundam robots.
Yeah, I think there's possibly a thing about in addition, because in addition to being the nice one, she is the scaredy cat.
Yeah,
She's the one who's really nervous about cooking battles and about in particular, she is so Soma is the diner kid who doesn't really have time for who doesn't have time for how highly all these gourmet people think of themselves, although he acknowledges he has got a lot to learn from it. But crucially, he's like, if at any point I get expelled, that will suck because it'll mean I have lost this challenge I have set myself. But also, I'll just go back and run the diner. Nothing really bad is going to happen to me. Megumi is similarly from like a little rural country restaurant. Sending her to this fancy school is implied to be like a very like the major financial investment her parents are ever going to be able to make is sending her to this fancy school.
mm,
She's terrified of letting them down.
yeah,
Her plan, if she gets kicked out, is still to go back and work at the restaurant at home. But I think it's interesting that she doesn't believe that she'd be able to do it.
yeah,
She doesn't think that that's a situation in which everything would be fine. If she manages to graduate from the fancy cooking school, then she could go home and reinvigorate the restaurant. But if she gets kicked out, she won't be able to do it. It's kind of her vibe.
I relate deeply to Megumi.
She is honestly the person who has the most rational response to things like, I have been summoned to give a cooking battle against a Michelin starred chef as a first year, and if I don't beat him, I'm expelled.
Yeah,
And she's like, well, that's terrifying, and I don't want to do it. And that is a correct response.
I love her. I respect her. I relate to her. I also think she is the only one of these people I would want to hang out with in real life.
Some of the side characters seem fine.
They seem fine, but only due to lack of exposure. I have to assume they're the same as, like, everyone who cooks in this show is the worst.
That's fair.
Anyway,
That's fair.
but yeah, Megumi has some gender in her, is all I'm saying. And they're like, okay, they're not. There are a few girls in the show who I think there's actually a lot of variety in the female characters, and they aren't all stock archetypes, which I appreciate in a modern
Yeah.
anime. But there are a lot of sort of elements I think you can glean something about gender in the society that produced this text from, which is the traits which are considered, which are sort of shown as positive, even with as they are negatives. So there are like negatives which are forgivable, negative which are funny, and then
Hmm.
there are just out and out negatives. Like the thing is, Erina is snobbish. She is frankly unpleasant towards the beginning, and
Yeah.
we are given like very sympathetic explanations for why she is like this, but she is still fundamentally snobbish, standoffish, and aloof.
Right. They
And
decide they
these
like
are,
her anyway, and that these are entertaining foibles, but she doesn't stop being a
yeah,
snob.
exactly. In a way that like we don't really see male characters being aloof in the same manner, at
No.
least not forgivably so. And I think from that we can say that this is perhaps a forgivable element of femininity. High class, aloof women? Women are a thing that is permitted to exist within the context that this work was created. It's a character archetype, or at the very least, a stereotype, which
Yeah,
is
and
sort of recognizable.
I think specifically there's a high quality woman is one who will make you work for her
Yeah,
kind of vibe.
yeah.
Like, if a woman is worth catching, she will make you impress her first.
And I think it is notable that every other girl in this is more helpful. Some of them have to be defeated into friendship first, but that's just anime for you. But everyone else is like more helpful to other human beings than Erina.
Erina is not helpful to other human beings. It is
Like
not her
everyone
thing.
else is here learning about the power of friendship and working together, and she's just like, I have seen your power of friendship. I appreciate it. It's not for me.
Erina's whole thing is that she is I don't need anything from anyone. You are all beneath me.
Mm.
I have the best tongue. Therefore, I do not need your pitiful human companionship. And I realize that this she is a product of her upbringing, but also that's a very funny
It is deeply
person to
funny.
be.
And I think also, like, it is interesting because we do see her upbringing, and this upbringing is treated as extreme, yes,
Yeah.
but it is not treated as bananas within the context of the work, which I think does tell us something about how the higher classes are viewed.
Right. It's treated in a way that this is actually the proof that she is as aristocratic as she believes.
Yes, everyone knows the true value of aristocracy is mistreating your children.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how you know they fancy.
There's something very deep there about how aristocracy is a self-perpetuating abuse scheme as
It
well
is.
as a wealth thing.
Aristocracy is a human rights abuse. Like, we would not let someone just, like, drop another human baby into that world if we didn't have an existing paradigm for it called
Right,
aristocracy.
you could never create Eton if people knew what Eton was.
Yeah, like, if you just went into, like, if you tried, it's like if you tried to just create the royal family from scratch, people would be like, no, that's terrible governing and also cruel to children.
Right. Be like, however, humans have a right to a private life, and therefore you are not having a monarchy. We don't
I'm not
actually
saying,
allow you to assign people lifelong jobs at birth.
yeah, like, we don't let that happen to anyone else, but because they're the aristocracy, we go, well, yeah, this is good and fine, actually.
Right, it's not a job, it's a privilege and an inheritance, we tell ourselves
Yeah.
as we fail to evolve. Anyway,
um, daily aristocracy rant checked off.
we've talked about the Normans and we didn't rant at all, so we deserved a little bit of an aristocracy rant.
Exactly. But, like, it's interesting because it tells you that that is the way the aristocracy is viewed. The aristocracy does bananas things to their children to make them more good and classy.
Right, it's how you can tell that they're aristocrats, is because they're insane. In
Yes.
specifically child abusive ways.
And, like, it's really interesting. In the third season, when her fascist dad takes over the school, she runs away because she doesn't want to live with her fascist dad, which is fair
She goes
enough.
and slums it with the other kids.
She goes and slums it in the boarding school dormitory,
Has
which is
learned to
slightly
do
less
laundry,
expensive.
and it's embarrassing for her.
Yeah, and she finds out that, like, there's a real, like, Titanic moment where they, like, are being creative with food, and she goes, they didn't follow the rules,
Food can
but their
be
food is still good.
food can be fun is a genuine revelation. It takes us several episodes to work up to.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
it's
It tells you a lot
fascinating.
about it would be a deeply touching moment of this both sheltered and abused aristocratic child learning about the wider world of human interaction, except it's framed through learning the true joy of cooking, which makes it funny.
It's also quite funny that, like, while she has this revelation internally, she does not change her behavior significantly externally
She
once all of it
behaves
is
exactly
over.
the same and tells no one. Yes.
Yeah, like, it is implied that her friends understand that she values them and that, like, she feels differently now, but her behavior does not change,
No.
even a little bit.
She's now putting them down affectionately, but it's just vibes.
She's saying the same words in the same tone of voice.
But this time she's blushing slightly, and her
Yeah,
camera angle has changed.
exactly. So you know that she means it with love now. And again, I think this tells you a lot about the world in which this was created, which is a world where it makes more sense for you to go and slum it and discover the true meaning of cooking, than to, like, go to the fucking police. Tell them
Yes.
your weird fascist dad is being a weird fascist.
No one ever considers that there might be an external society that could have an impact on their decisions, but particularly around the autocratic rule of both fascist dad and unelected school board.
Yeah, and, like, look, I'm actually quite willing to accept the, like, Sokugeki framework where, like, yeah, 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 all of this stuff is decided through food battles. Yeah, 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 you have a food fascist taking over the school. Whatever. Like, I'm just gonna accept that this school is very autonomous.
Yeah, I mean it's a standard conceit as far as I can tell of like Japanese school anime is that in order
Exactly.
to the kids have the necessary power to change things and therefore give some stakes, you have a student council that essentially runs the place because that means the kids have something to both compete for and meaningfully affect.
Exactly.
Whereas if it's just no, you're 11 and there are adults running the show, the stakes are necessarily lower because you can't actually change how the school runs. So this is I feel this is a conceit of the genre.
There are, like, 2 main personal drama arcs that you sent to me as, like, examples of how this world is working. One of which is the commercial district is losing money because everybody is going to the chain restaurant, and one of which is Erina runs away from her abusive dad. And the thing that's really interesting to me is that the problems of the upper classes are solved quietly and without fuss and just by other people just accommodate them.
Oh yeah.
Whereas the problems of the working classes are solved by we will work really hard, we will come together as a community, and we will make this happen with lots of noise and news coverage and, you
Yeah.
know, general business behavior.
However we solve this, it is absolutely going to involve not making a scene. To the
Yeah.
point that you can make sure you get your way by making sure that denying you your way in this particular instance would involve making a scene.
Yeah. However, I will say that, like, throwing a huge number of children out of their home by force doesn't count as making a scene in this paradigm.
No. You can come and evict the entire dormitory and also knock it down.
With people still inside it.
People inside with children inside it. You could bring in the wrecking ball with children inside the building, and this is not going to make any news. Which again is a very aristocratic approach to solving problems.
And I just think this continues to tell a lot about the class dichotomies of the world in which this work was created,
Mm.
which is. And I know we are coming at this from the perspective of British people who have existed our entire lives in the British class system. I mean, listen to my
It is the
accent.
water in which we have swum, yes.
I know about the world of not making a fuss.
We are familiar with getting your way by having the argument in the restaurant.
We call it a stiff upper lip, but it is the same basic
We
concept.
understand not making a scene, darling.
Yes. But the thing that's interesting is that this world clearly expects it's not brought up. They don't explain why Elena cannot simply go to the police and say, "Hey, my dad is like hurting me whenever I don't want to throw away slightly less than perfect food."
Right. There is some nonsense happening here.
It doesn't need to be explained why she would not go to the police in universe. Therefore, we must assume that it would not need to be explained out of universe.
Yes. It's just an obvious thing.
Which is this is a society which considers it plausible that the rich can just get away with stuff. This is a society that considers it reasonable that the only way that the sort of working class people of the commercial district can combat a big fancy chain with a lot of seed money coming to their area and gentrifying it Or, well, gentrifying is not the right word. I don't know the word for
It's just pulling off the custom, really.
chainifying it. Yeah, it's pulling off the custom, but it's pulling off the custom in like a way that I don't fully follow, just because the establishment of a train station chicken shop doesn't quite work in my mental understanding of how
No, but
business is pulled away from commercial districts.
for us, the train steak and chicken shop is itself the thing that will go bust next week.
Yeah, like I cannot express to you how much a fried chicken shop in a train station is a thing of terror and 1 a.m.
You will get
curry.
poisoned, and 2, because everyone who ever eats there will get poisoned. They will go bust next week, but it won't matter because the week after next there'll be a new chicken shop.
Yeah, chicken shops just come and go in the UK.
They're always a little bit dodgy.
Yeah. Like, there was a, like, big scandal several years ago when, a local council started putting anti-knife crime slogans on the boxes of chicken shops
Ooh, targeted advertising.
because they are so heavily associated with, like, working class people of color
Uh-huh,
that it was very
uh-huh.
much going, "Hey, black kids, poor black
Right.
kids, stop stabbing people."
We're
To
targeting
which
gangs through their favorite chicken shops.
yeah, it was, a
Mm.
look, which makes the entire, like, fancy chain fried chicken thing really hard to get my head around
Right.
spiritually.
Imagining a gentrified chicken shop is a little brain breaking.
It's really hard to, like, okay, look, I've been to some chicken shops that were, like, trying to be fancy, and they were
Work.
terrifying.
You can't do you can't both be a chicken shop and but we have to accept as a premise of this particular story that this is a gentrifying chicken shop.
I know, and I find it so hard to get my head around, especially because it's in a train station, which is just not a place like even, like, the really fancy restaurants in, like, St Pancras Station are less fancy by dint of being in a train station.
It does add a certain misery to the surroundings.
A certain je ne sais quoi of depression.
Just a certain grime on the floor, a certain air of economic
Like, it
desperation.
doesn't matter how fancy your restaurant is, you're still next to a Greggs.
Right.
Nowhere is that fancy if you're within brick throwing distance of a Greggs, because the brick could be thrown.
But also, speaking as a person who can not afford the fancy restaurant but does like a Greggs, I do appreciate when a train station has a Greggs.
I do appreciate a Greggs in a train station, you're not wrong. But yeah, my point being, however brain breaking I find it that there is a fancy chicken shop poaching the customers away from the like authentic local commercial district
Mhm.
situation, the solution to that is community organizing and promoting like the value of shopping small on TV
Right. It
and
is
having good
crucially
quality
not
products.
turning up to the chicken shop with a wrecking ball,
Yeah,
threatening them with your underground contacts, just walking in and being rich at them so they know they're outclassed. You know, ways that fascist dad would solve it.
exactly. God, I would love to see fascist dad versus
The chicken shop.
gentrification chicken shop lady. That would be incredible. And the solution to working class problems, I will point out in this, both are solved by community, but the working class people have to show talent in the community, whereas the rich people need to receive kindness in the community.
Right, she has to lower herself to receiving the charity of her
Whereas to take out the chicken shop, they actually have to be better at chicken shop.
right. Right,
And
whereas obviously they will turn out to help her when in her hour of need because she is important.
yeah, and I just think that tells you a lot about the class dynamics of the culture from which this work originates.
I buy it. Yeah.
That is very much like all I wanted to say, but I did want to do a little recap at the end where we just talk about the real place, Japan.
Right, and we've been going for ages, so
We've been going for ages, and to be
we'll
fair,
stop analyzing, and we will now return to real facts about the real Japan that we are aware of.
we're not going to go into a huge amount of this because, frankly, I did enough research into the stuff, into watching the show and contextualizing the things I didn't understand in it.
Listener, if you really need to understand where we have gone wrong in our recreation of lost to history ancient culture Japan, now known only through this anime, if you feel that we may have got that historical culture wrong, you have so many research options that are better than this podcast, and I really encourage you to make use of them. We are not going to explain the whole of Japan to you in the next 5 minutes.
Well, this is just a really interesting thing that I thought would be really hard to analyze through the lens of the archaeological lens, but I do think is interesting from an archaeological lens standpoint, if that makes
Mhm,
sense.
okay.
Is this is interesting in the broader context of like school anime and school anime competitions. and the stylization of the work. And I think if I was doing an archaeological reading of this, I would want to talk about it, but it's going to be very difficult to explain, so I wanted to do it more as a like little final, little spark, little end note, little fun bit at the end.
Go
This
for
is
it.
borrowing from so many different school sports anime, school anime. Like I mentioned that there's like the Gundam fights and martial art fights in the Imagine spots.
Yeah, there's some pretty cool dress up in armor and have samurai battle sections as well.
Yeah, I just think this is a really fascinating little encapsulation, and if I was approaching this as an archaeological text, it would be such a rich text because there are so many things that appear to come completely out of nowhere. And what it makes me think of is I know there's a Tumblr post about this, so I'm assuming at least some of our readers have encountered the concept.
Mhm.
There's an area of material research which has been looking at basically what was in shipping lists and things like that, what was being imported and sold to theatres in Shakespearean times to try
Oh,
and
when
look
it
at
explains the
the
bear.
bear. Yes.
Yes, because there's been all of these theories about why is there this stage direction of exit stage left pursued by a bear? And
Yeah.
eventually they have established that there was in fact a bear cub.
Yeah, there was a bear cub that was just doing the rounds in London, like it was, a
Right.
would-be comedian in Edinburgh.
So the explanation for why there's a stage direction about the bear is probably they had rented the bear.
And, like, you gotta work the bear in somehow because you gotta make use of the bear while you have a bear.
Right, and the easiest thing to do with a semi-trained animal on stage is have it held on a leash on one side and have its handler with the food on the other side and allow it
Have it
to amble across for its treats,
pursuing somebody.
pursuing somebody in what was probably a deeply adorable way.
Yes. And, like, you see this with a lot of, like, extraneous elements in plays
Mm,
from, like, especially that period because we have a lot of plays preserved from that period, but we also see this in miracle plays, which I know I've been thinking about recently.
mm. A lot
You
of
see a lot of these.
there's we've learned to do a trick. We want to show you our trick.
Yeah, there's a lot of these like extraneous elements, which quite often when you're reading historic text, there will be something that seems to you as the reader to come completely out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And like exit stage left pursued by a bear is, I think, maybe the most famous version of this in all of literature.
Hmm.
But this is true of almost anything. Like if you spend a lot of time on TV tropes looking at the trivia pages, you'll find a lot of these.
Right, and it's not just stage plays either. There's a lot of
No.
films where why is this scene here? Because we really want to show off this thing we could do with Technicolor.
Exactly. Like, I'm a huge fan of, like, Oculus Hammer era horror movies, and quite a lot of them will have very slow scenes where somebody bleeds a very unnatural shade of red because they wanted to show off their red.
Right, it's the color of the red matching isn't the point. That isn't they're not going for photorealism. What they're going for is for you to be impressed in the cinema by the redness of the red on screen.
Yeah. Like, if you watch, like, movies from a culture that you don't usually watch movies from, like, if you watch a Bollywood movie and that's not a thing you do often, quite often there will be a moment where, like, an actor comes on and everything stops because that actor is a huge deal.
Yes, they're giving the audience a moment to finish jumping in for joy because they recognize the actor. And to
Yeah.
get back into the swing of okay, now he's going to act for us. We have to have that moment of it's him before we can. Otherwise, we'll miss the first three things he says because we were too busy going. It's him. The
Like,
pause is functional as well as sort of demonstrative.
this is like me the first time I watched this the remake of One Day at a Time, having absolutely no idea who Rita Moreno was, wondering why every time Abuelita comes out of the curtain, everything stops. Because I had no idea who this lady was or that she was a huge deal. So every time she draws the curtains, it's just like the curtains draw and she stands there for like a minute. And I'm like,
Like, why is
hello?
this happening?
Random lady. I was thinking about this. If you had never heard of anime, you had not heard of, maybe you had heard of the historical civilization of Japan, but you didn't know much about it.
Yep.
Every single episode of this introduces you to a new bear to pursue you. There are so many bears, Duck. It's just bears left, right, and center.
Name some bears for me.
There are the Gundams, there are the martial arts battles, there are the naked people with tentacles whenever he shows them his gross squid food that they don't like.
Yep.
there are like there's at one point like a sort of the clothes coming off bit is animated with these like really bright lights and colors that to me
Yeah,
look highly stylized, and they look familiar, but I'm not sure that I don't think they're just random bursts of colors. I think they look like something, but I've no idea what.
right. There's a lot of references sort of sneaking in the background.
Yeah, there's just like, and like you mentioned, there's a subplot of people trading light novels. There's a lot of little cultural details, but there are also just a lot of imagined spots where it's really unclear if this thing that is happening is something you're supposed to have any knowledge of. And like my archetypal like example of this is the Gundam suits because it's my favorite one, just because I think it's a very fun, like it's the most fun battle they do. But
Yeah,
there are non-battle versions of this.
yeah.
Like I mean the sexy spots are one of them. Quite a lot of the like sexy imagined spots are actually like quite niche is the phrase I'm gonna go with.
Yes, like they are drawn in a this is the sexy spot way, but unless you had quite particular interests, they might not be appealing in and of themselves. You might not look at the sexy spots and go, "This is a situation I would like to be in.
Yeah.
I am bathing in the witch's soup."
Yeah. Like you mentioned, the one-sided rival guy, like, only really makes sense if you're aware of rival anime characters as a thing.
Yes. Yes, I
One of
mean, my reading of this as his little gay crush is flippant, but if I
Yeah.
didn't know that the big anime rivalry being subverted by Soma just not noticing he's supposed to be in a rivalry was a joke about anime rivalries, then that reading would be sincere because I'd have no other way to understand that whole dynamic.
There's, like, a thing that I really noticed is a lot of the background characters don't look like background characters, which is a thing you would not notice if you were,
Like, there is
like
an abundance of people drawn as anime protagonists. They've got the spiky hair, they've got the colors, they've got the
yeah.
purple eyes.
There are multiple establishing shots of corridors which feature someone doing the glasses glint with a middle finger lifting the glasses pose,
Yeah.
all of whom look exactly like every, like, dark-haired, clever glasses anime protagonist
Right,
character.
Maru, who is the his entire character is to be a reference to he's the clever glasses one.
Yeah, and, like, there's a lot of it's a very self-referential show, and I think it's a lot of anime is very interreferential. I think partly because of the working model, where a
Yeah.
lot of it is
Same artist
done.
a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's a lot this is the difference between, like, European comics, American comics, like, manga, manhwa. They all have different working models, and
Yeah.
there's different definitions of, like, the creator, the partnerships, etcetera, and manga in particular tends to have the mangaka model, I think does lead to a lot of interreferentialism because a lot of it is, like, one-man production team, but those one-man production teams talk to one another a lot.
Yes.
As opposed to we are a bunch of doubles, whereas, like, American comics for a really long time tended to be there is a three-man production team and the three men change every week.
Yes, I think my impression at least of the sort of how manga is produced style is it's quite like a lot of fan fiction communities will go through really noticeable rounds of interest in a particular trope or a particular AU.
Yeah,
All of the fics are being written by independent people. The people are not
yeah,
actually collaborating on this, but because they are all talking to each other and reading each other's work, somebody gets a great idea, and then people get sparked off that to write their own version of that idea. So as you look through the list of what's been written, it's like, well, earlier in the year, everyone was doing the coffee shop thing, and then prior to that, it was this really strange one where this guy's a minotaur.
yeah.
It's unclear why that guy was a minotaur, and it's because somebody had that idea and everyone else picked it up.
And it's also very funny when, like, some of them are deeply predictable and some of them aren't, especially when you're, like, consuming a media and you're watching it going, "Yeah, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of, like, praise kink adjacent wump with this dude." There's,
Right.
like, you some of it's really predictable, and then some of it's, like, you get to the fandom, you're like, "Wow, everybody was into coffee shop AUs, just everybody." Like, they're
Right.
fine, but everybody?
I was expecting to have 16 variations on that attempted kidnapping did succeed, and then there was a rescue. Great story, by the way.
Yeah,
I was not expecting the Minotaur.
yeah.
Why were you all into Minotaurs? Why is it always that guy who's the Minotaur?
Quite a lot of it is when it's, like, normal stock AUs, like, I'm not surprised that there's a firefighter AU or a flower shop AU. I am surprised that it's always this guy. Really? He's the florist to you?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I'm not the biggest fan of, like, I tend to, like, read not that many, like, you know, coffee shop, florist, whatever,
I think we are
teacher
both what I'm
AUs.
gonna call canon setting snobs.
Or rather, I don't mind non-canon settings, I just like my non-canon settings weirder.
Fair.
Like, happy to have a coffee like, I'm happy to have a coffee shop AU, it's just the coffee shop has to be haunted.
That does sound like a great AU.
I know, right? I should write that. Anyway, my point being, like, that's just not my thing, but I do notice them, and I always, like, get, like, mildly het up when I see too many, like, go past that all disagree with me in the same fundamental way. I'm like, "Okay, you fucking heathens with your college AUs."
Who would not be a math major?
Yeah. Anyway, we are very off topic. My
Yeah.
point being, like, this anime is very prone to being self-referential and interreferential and intro-referential,
Yeah.
and all of those different types of references that all technically mean different things, and I don't care about them right now.
Look them up yourself, listener.
This one
We
in
believe in you.
specific, yeah, that's your homework. Go learn about Japan and also references. Food Wars in specific is designed in such a way that it does mean that, like, they're the references are more overt because they happen primarily in imagined spots or are whole plot references, like the sort of general genre tropes of cool
Being a
sports
student.
anime being reinvented for a world where sports is food competitions.
Yes. Yeah.
And I
Because you're
think,
doing a full animated 10-second spot that does not have to have any plot connection, any setting connection, apart from recognizably these two characters in some kind of conflict.
that recognizably, if this were a true archaeological reading where we didn't know that much about the society, or even where we did know quite a lot, but we were always willing to learn more, like my Ovid example earlier,
Yeah.
in a true archaeological reading, we would be
Looking
absolutely
up all of
surrounded
those
by
other
bears.
texts.
We
Right.
would be
Or
absolutely surrounded by bears.
if not looking up those texts, we'd be making a list in every episode or every imagined spot going, okay, this is a reference to some other work. So we
Yeah,
know that there was another work that had these traits.
exactly. And I think that's kind of the most interesting thing about thinking about things through this lens is looking at the world around us and going, oh, which of these things would be meaningless and unrecognizable without the specific cultural context?
Right. There's a whole bit about this guy's the White Knight and he wears armor and but specifically he's like a very Disney knight where he's in the plate
Yeah.
armor, he's got the shiny sword, and then the animals of the forest are coming and eating out of his hand. And I think you have to have a lot of background for that to make sense because
Mm,
nothing in this anime is going to explain it to you. You just
exactly.
have to know about white knights and forest animals eating out of their hands as a thing
And
that
I just
can
think
happen.
that's neat.
There you have it. That's the review.
No,
It's
the review is we're surrounded by bears.
the review is we're surrounded by bears. Okay. Having concluded that we are surrounded by bears, should we find out what we're doing next time?
Yes, let me just quickly open
Actually,
my
first,
lists.
we should decide whether we're putting this back in the pot, and if not,
Yes.
what to put in instead.
I mean, I would be happy to put it back in the pot.
Are you enthused by it, or do you want to do something new?
I
Because
am
I have a
ambivalent.
candidate if we want.
I would say I was fairly ambivalent, and I feel like there is more to say of this, but there are schools of analysis I really don't want to get this on.
Okay, I have a candidate for a replacement.
Okay, what is your stake in should we put this back in the hat or not? Would you rather have this or your replacement?
My stake is I'd quite like to just put the replacement in.
Okay, let's take this out of the hat. We have done Food Wars. We have
We have done
themed
Food
it
Wars, and
full of bears.
we have taxidermied it. It is standing in the corner. Its eyes are flashing evilly when the lightning goes. So I'm not putting in to replace it an absurdist anime, although I have been watching a couple. Assassination Classroom is wild.
That on my
Um,
list for a while. I have heard fun things.
I'm enjoying myself.
And there's a crossover starring my favorite character in My Hero Academia, so I'm probably going to end up watching it just so
Oh
I can
my.
read that. The main reason I watch anime is because there's a crossover I want to read.
Instead, I would like to put into the hat the book Just City by Joe Walton. Sorry, The Just City by Joe Walton,
Gotcha.
of which I will tell you the premise,
Okay.
which is that the goddess Athene sets up Plato's republic with the help of everyone who's ever prayed to her in ancient Greek to live there.
Fascinating. I love it. I'm excited.
It's great. It is a book rich in themes and implications.
Okay. Would you like to roll a 15-sided die?
I would love
Dice.
to roll a 15-sided die. Let me just pull up a dice roller. It's the same one I always use because it's the one that my browser history remembers that I have used. 15-sided. 7.
Biographical. This could go in many directions.
Okay.
And 101.
101. 57.
Oh, for heaven's sake, this is one where I have to do homework again.
Oh no!
Shadows of the Apt.
Oh no! That's a 10-book series.
Oh, God.
I am not going to ask you to read the 10-book series. I actually
I would
also...
not do it if you asked me.
We are going to have to re-roll this one. Because
Okay.
Shadows of the Apt was written by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I am 1 degree of separation from Adrian, and I feel deeply weird doing
That's
a
fair.
biographical reading of my friend's friends.
That's fair.
Like, that's... I'm vetoing that just because it's Adrian.
That's
Okay.
very fair.
Early number this time, 15.
15. Ooh. Ah. So it's
Huh?
in medieval French.
I'm doomed. The dice gods hate me.
I hate you. Do you want to re-roll again?
No, I'm going to do a biographical reading of stories in medieval French, although you will have to find me a translation because I do
I
not
will
read
find you a
medieval French.
translation. Let me
I
just
will
have
be
a
wrong
very
about
quick look.
everything, and that therein will lie the fun.
Well, we don't know anything really about the author except that she was French.
Great. I know one thing about. I have one point of analysis I'm fairly confident of, and will be right on. And apart
And
from that,
well, we don't actually know that for sure. But
she
she
was
was
writing in
called
French.
Marie de France, which is a good indication that she
It's a
was
clue.
probably French.
This feels like a strong clue, even.
Okay, so next time you can join us, listener, for a biographical reading of Les Lady de Marie de France.
I believe there are werewolves.
There are werewolves.
Excellent. Gay
And the
medieval French
werewolves
werewolves.
are gay.
There was a whole thesis written on this by someone who I feel like I've heard of. And the gayness
Yes.
of the medieval werewolves.
This is an area in which I have some familiarity. I'm going to really struggle to let you take the lead on this one because I have so many opinions.
I'm going to be wrong on so many things, and you're going to know all the things I'm wrong about. And I think that's going to
Just
be a
gonna have
productive
to
conversation for the listener.
sit there and vibrate.
It's all right. Okay, I'm saying now, we're changing up the structure just a little tiny bit, which is that next time, after I do my analysis, you get to do the correction.
We'll see.
We'll do a whole segment where you explain to me the points on which I was wrong.
So we don't actually know anything about her, so you could be right. No matter what you say, you could be right.
The possibility is always there.
Yeah. Unless you say, like, she was,
A
a
werewolf.
time traveler from the modern day. You're
I assume
probably...
it's autobiographical, and therefore she was a gay werewolf.
She was. I think she was a gay werewolf and also a bird and also a tree and also whatever the one that shot the deer that shot him in the penis was.
An unlucky man.
It's very gender. You'll enjoy some gender.
I'm looking forward to the medieval French gender.
I'm going to see if I will start looking to see if I can find you an English version. I'm sure they're widely available in English. It's just about quality of translation that I need to worry, really.
Yeah. Just find me one that you feel is up to the job, and I will trust your judgment.
Cool, because I have modern French editions, but no English ones. Otherwise, I would just post it to you.
That's fair. I unfortunately also do not read modern French.
Yes.
I don't think
Okay.
the 2 weeks is not enough time for me to learn.
I think that would be a fun challenge.
Join us next time for a biographical reading of the English-French Collins Dictionary. This has been Analysis Roulette. We've been watching Food Wars, and next time, medieval French werewolves. We are nothing if not eclectic.
God knows that's true. Goodbye.
See ya. You've been listening to Analysis Roulette, a podcast applying a randomly selected mode of analysis to a randomly selected creative work, just to see what happens. Your hosts have been Dia and Duck. You can find us on Spotify or on YouTube, and if you'd like to get in touch, you can send us an email at analysisroulette@gmail.com. And remember, if you like our show, share it with your friends, and if you don't like our show, share it with your enemies. Thanks.